Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we step into a world that is less about strategy and more about survival. A world where snowflakes fall thick and silent, muffling your footsteps and the clatter of armor, and the wind whips across open plains so sharply it makes you question why anyone thought marching through it was a good idea. You probably won't survive this without luck and preparation. But tonight, you get to experience it safely from your chair. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And why not share your location and local time in the comments? It's fascinating to imagine how this same story would feel in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, flow straight into the story. You trudge forward, your boots crunching in thick, crusted snow, and immediately you notice the way the cold penetrates through every layer of clothing. Medieval soldiers didn't have Gore-Tex or insulated boots. They had wool, linen, and fur, layered haphazardly according to what each soldier owned or could scavenge. A mainstream historical fact is that armies began winter campaigns with considerable preparation, stockpiling firewood and salted meat. Yet even the best preparations could not fully defend against a sudden snowstorm. The air is crisp, almost metallic in its chill, and as you breathe, tiny crystals form on your eyelashes. You rub them away absent-mindedly and realize that each exhale is a small cloud, a visible reminder that the air is doing its own work against your warmth. Historians still argue whether the severity of these snowstorms was fully anticipated by commanders, or whether armies relied on luck and local knowledge to survive. Imagine trudging through a valley where snowdrifts obscure the terrain. You hear the faint clop of horse hooves behind you and catch glimpses of your companions, all hunched against the wind, their cloaks flapping like worn banners. A quirky tidbit: some soldiers would stuff straw or moss inside their boots to act as insulation, creating an improvised layer between their frozen toes and the icy ground beneath. It seems primitive now, but in those moments, it was ingenuity that made the difference between frostbite and numbness. The first challenge is simply movement. Each step sinks into soft snow, sometimes thigh deep, forcing you to lift your legs slowly, as if wading through a viscous fluid. Your arms ache from gripping a spear or the reins of a shivering horse. You notice that your gloves, though layered, have become damp from melting snow, and the sensation of wet wool against skin is both irritating and chilling. The smell of damp leather and wet fur fills your nose. Your companion coughs, and the sound carries eerily in the muffled silence. Soldiers often describe the world in these moments as being quieter than a forest at night, yet more dangerous because you can't see what lies ahead. As the group pushes forward, you encounter your first logistical hurdle: the wagons. A mainstream historical fact is that supply wagons were essential for carrying food, firewood, and equipment. But snow could easily trap them. Wooden wheels became encased in ice, axles groaned under stress, and oxen often struggled to maintain footing. A fringe practice that seems almost whimsical to us now was the use of tar or grease on wheels to reduce friction, though its effectiveness was debated. The air smells faintly of hay and smoke from small fires that soldiers try to light to thaw frozen wagon axles. You can hear the groaning of the wood as tension builds under weight, and the distant sound of a bell on a horse swaying in rhythm with its cautious steps creates a steady, almost hypnotic cadence. Food is another immediate concern. You pull a hunk of hardtack from your pack. It is dry, tasteless, yet sustains you. Historians still debate whether early season stockpiling truly prevented starvation, or if the severity of winter often rendered these measures insufficient. Some soldiers added small touches of flavour when they could, scraping fat from salted pork onto their bread to soften it and add warmth. A quirky detail that speaks to the small comforts clung to in desperation. Every bite seems like accomplishment, every swallow a defiance against the cold that gnaws at your stomach as much as your fingers. Sleep is fleeting and uncomfortable. When a temporary campsite is found, you huddle close to others, sharing body warmth. Wool blankets, often damp from snow and sweat, provide limited insulation. The wind presses against tent flaps, occasionally forcing them inward with a whip-like snap. You notice the smell of wet earth mixed with smoke from a nearby fire, and the sound of snow striking canvas overhead. Soldiers would often break apart frozen logs for fuel, sometimes with their bare hands, learning quickly that endurance in these conditions depended as much on improvisation as on planning. Historians argue whether the choice of sleeping locations on hills, under trees, or near buildings significantly impacted survival rates. Each decision is a gamble, each camp a temporary reprieve. As night falls, visibility diminishes, and the landscape becomes a silent, undulating expanse of white. Shadows stretch across snowdrifts, making ordinary terrain appear alien and treacherous. You hear the occasional distant howl of a wolf, or perhaps it is the wind echoing through a valley, a fringe tidbit. Some armies reportedly tied small bells to their horses to avoid losing stragglers in low visibility, a measure that seems almost quaint against the vastness of the storm. You wrap your cloak tighter, noticing that even your hat, fur-lined and woolen, does not fully protect your ears. Every inch of exposed skin aches from cold. The first day concludes not with a triumphant arrival, but with cautious survival. Your companions settle around meagre fires, sharing stories in quiet voices, laughter muffled and sparse. You understand that this is the rhythm of winter campaigns movement: exhaustion, minor comfort, and perpetual vigilance. The snow has a sound of its own, a gentle hiss as more flakes fall, a reminder that the world continues to operate regardless of human struggle. You take one last glance at the field, recognizing both its beauty and its danger, before finally closing your eyes, ears attuned to the soft chorus of ice, wind, and the distant rumble of animals trudging through snow. By the time you drift into rest, your body exhausted but alert, you carry with you the first impressions of this frozen world: the bitter cold, the scent of wet leather and wood smoke, the constant crunch of snow underfoot, and the faint, human warmth of companions huddled together. You're learning that survival in medieval winters was as much about attention to detail, improvisation, and resilience as it was about numbers and tactics. Every step taken, every ration eaten, every hand stretched to stoke a fire is part of a delicate dance with the elements that soldiers endured long before modern conveniences made such journeys imaginable. The morning arrives with a muted light, filtering through a thick grey sky, and the world outside your tent feels almost suspended. Each snowflake hangs in the air for a brief moment before settling into the endless white carpet that stretches across hills and valleys. You rub your eyes and notice the frost clinging to the edges of your hood, crystallized like tiny glass sculptures. Early winter preparations were crucial for any medieval army that dared campaign in such conditions. Yet historians still argue whether commanders truly appreciated the depth of hardship that awaited them. Even meticulous plans could unravel in the face of sudden storms or unexpected terrain. You step outside and immediately feel the wind pushing against your chest, making each breath a small struggle. Soldiers have been stockpiling food weeks in advance: salted meats, hardtack, dried fruits, and sometimes grains for soup. Fires had been prepared in caches, and wagons were reinforced to carry both supplies and precious equipment. A quirky tidbit in some regions. Armies would pack small barrels of brandy, not for celebration, but to prevent freezing in cooking pots and to offer a quick internal warmth for weary men. You scoop a handful of snow, letting it melt slowly on your tongue, and feel a pang of longing for water that isn't icy or contaminated. Your companions emerge, wrapped in layered furs, linen under wool under leather, each layer struggling to keep the cold at bay. Historians debate whether these layers were standardized or improvised according to what each soldier could afford or carry. Some wore heavy cloaks over their armour, others stuffed spare clothing beneath chainmail. The effect is a patchwork of textures and colours in the grey snow, like a muted parade of survival. The air carries the scent of wet leather from boots and belts, mixed with faint smoke from the fires that still smoulder among the tents. Wagons creak as they are readied to move, and oxen paw at the snow-covered ground. The sound is rhythmic and oddly comforting, a counterpoint to the hush of snow falling from bare branches. A mainstream historical fact is that supply lines were a lifeline, yet snow could trap wagons, break axles, or cause animals to collapse under the weight of provisions. You notice a soldier jabbing a frozen wheel with an iron spike, trying to free it, and another blowing into his gloved hands to restore some warmth. Survival here is mechanical as much as it is physical, and every detail matters. As you march forward, the landscape shifts. A shallow valley collects wind, and snowdrifts form subtle hills and troughs, hiding rocks and holes. Historians still argue whether careful route planning actually reduced casualties, or if unpredictability always outweighed planning. Some commanders relied on local guides, whose knowledge of the terrain could mean the difference between a safe crossing and a broken leg. A quirky tidbit in some cases. Small bells were tied to the feet of scouts or animals to monitor progress, and alert others to hidden dangers beneath the snow. Midday brings a pause. Soldiers huddle around small fires, feeding them with straw, wood, and occasionally dung when dry wood is scarce. The smell is pungent, but the warmth is invaluable. You notice the haphazard way some men wrap wet cloaks around themselves, trading minor dryness for immediate heat. Food is consumed in quiet bites, each mouthful a brief comfort against the persistent chill. Historians debate whether armies ever had enough supplies to sustain prolonged campaigns in deep winter, or if rationing was a constant negotiation with fate. Some records suggest that improvisation was key, melting snow for soup, softening hardtack with broth, or boiling leather straps to create edible gelatin in desperate circumstances. Movement continues, and with it comes vigilance. You notice footprints fading quickly in the softening snow, creating a sense of impermanence in every step. Scouts move ahead, peering into the whiteness for signs of ambush or hidden hazards. Fringe practices appear in reports of these campaigns, soldiers using sharpened stakes to probe hidden ice patches, or tying ropes between tents and wagons to avoid losing anyone in whiteout conditions. The sensory experience is constant. The crunch of frozen snow, the hiss of wind, the smell of smoke mixed with damp earth, and the weight of layers pressing against your body. As evening approaches, the army sets up camp again, choosing sites that offer minimal exposure to wind and drifting snow. Soldiers gather firewood, sometimes raiding nearby villages or forests, and create small shelters using tarps, tents, or branches. You notice the way smoke curls upward, mixing with the fading light and casting a soft, grey haze over the scene. Historians still debate whether pre-planned firewood caches meaningfully reduced exposure-related deaths, or if armies relied too heavily on improvisation. A quirky detail: some soldiers would rub pork fat onto wooden tools and armour, not just for preservation, but to create a subtle sheen that might reflect light and deter frost accumulation. Night falls, and with it comes a deeper sense of vulnerability. The wind whistles through trees and over hills, and the sound of snow settling on canvas tents is almost hypnotic. You lie close to companions, feeling warmth radiate from shared bodies and from the small fires scattered through camp. Every movement is deliberate, every sound is registered. You are learning that survival in medieval winters was a constant balance of preparation, improvisation, and endurance. The landscape feels vast, indifferent, and yet strangely intimate as the cold presses against every inch of exposed skin and the smell of wet wool. Smoke and wood permeates your senses. By the time sleep approaches, your mind is already replaying the day the trudging marches, frozen wagons, clever adaptations, and the small comforts of fire and food. You feel both exhausted and alert, aware that tomorrow will bring a new series of challenges. You carry with you a subtle understanding that early winter preparations were more than mere routines. They were strategies for survival, and yet they were never guaranteed. In the quiet, muffled world of snow, you understand the delicate dance between human ingenuity and the relentless force of winter. The first day is over, but the story of endurance, adaptation, and subtle ingenuity has only just begun. The snow continues to fall as you march, each step pressing into a world that is simultaneously serene and merciless. You trudge through drifts that rise above your knees, feeling the cold seep past your layered clothing into the tips of your fingers. Medieval armies were astonishingly inventive when it came to surviving these conditions. Yet historians still argue whether some improvisations were born of necessity or tradition. The crunch of snow beneath boots is punctuated by the clatter of armour, and you notice how even a small misstep can send an ox or horse sliding, a reminder that movement itself is a calculated risk. Your companions adjust their cloaks and hoods, trading dryness for warmth. Some wrap straw or moss inside gloves and boots, a quirky tidbit that may seem odd now but offered surprising insulation against frostbite. Horses and oxen strain under wagons laden with supplies. A mainstream historical fact is that pack animals were critical to sustaining campaigns, carrying everything from salted meat to siege tools, and their loss could cripple an army. You watch a horse paw at the icy ground, its breath rising in clouds, and realize that survival depended as much on the health of animals as on the men themselves. The wind has picked up, carrying fine snow that bites at exposed skin. You notice the subtle layering of clothing beneath the armour linen shirts, padded wool, and fur collars, each layer intended to trap warmth. Historians debate whether the average soldier truly had access to adequate furs or whether wealth and rank dictated who stayed warmer. The smell of damp wool and wet leather pervades the air, a constant reminder that cold is as much about sensation as it is about endurance. Small fires flicker at intervals along the march, struggling against the wind, sending curls of smoke that smell faintly of burning straw and wood sap. Every so often, someone adjusts their spear or sword, wiping off frost that has formed on hilts and crossguards. Fringe tidbits from historical accounts mention soldiers rubbing meat fat on their weapons to prevent ice accumulation, a makeshift solution that seems bizarre but reflects practical ingenuity. You notice your own hands turning numb despite layers of gloves, and the simple act of flexing fingers becomes a task that demands attention. The landscape is monochromatic, a blur of white and grey, punctuated only by the dark shapes of trees and the occasional glint of metal. Food and water are limited on the move. You pull a piece of hardtack from your pack, the dry texture scratching your tongue, and sip from a canteen of partially melted snow. Historians still argue whether these rations were sufficient for maintaining strength on long marches or if armies routinely faced hidden hunger. You notice some soldiers gnawing on bits of salted pork, their breaths fogging in the icy air. The smells of meat, smoke, and leather mingle, creating a sensory map of survival, every scent intertwined with memory and necessity. The march continues through a shallow valley, the wind channeled like a living thing. You step carefully, noticing the way ice hides jagged rocks and frozen mud. A quirky tidbit: some scouts carried long poles tipped with iron to probe the snow ahead, checking for hidden dangers or thin ice that might give way beneath horses and wagons. Every sound is magnified in the hush of falling snow, the crunch of boots, the snort of a horse, and the occasional clink of metal forming a rhythm almost musical in its persistence. Camaraderie becomes essential. Soldiers exchange glances, nods, or whispered instructions. Their breath hangs visibly in the air, forming tiny clouds that drift away before dissipating. You feel a strange kinship with them, each person battling the cold in a different way. Historians debate whether morale played as significant a role as physical preparation in surviving harsh winters. Some records suggest that shared rituals, small games, or storytelling by the firelight could provide a psychological buffer against the relentless environment. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion begins to set in. You notice the subtle signs: slower steps, heavier breathing, and a slight lag in reaction time. Even the animals show fatigue, their heads drooping and hooves slipping occasionally. A fringe detail mentions that soldiers sometimes rub snow into the feet of their animals to stimulate circulation, an odd but practical method of maintaining mobility. You adjust your cloak and push onward, aware that stopping too long could chill the body dangerously. As the day wanes, the army searches for a suitable campsite. Trees provide minimal shelter from the wind, but they break its force enough to allow fires to maintain a flicker of warmth. A mainstream historical fact is that careful site selection was critical. Hills and natural windbreaks could mean the difference between surviving the night or suffering frost-related injuries. You and your companions gather small branches and broken logs, the smell of sap mixing with smoke and snow. The fires cast a warm, dancing glow against the white expanse, softening the harshness of the landscape. Night approaches slowly, and with it comes the eerie silence of snowfall in open terrain. You feel a heightened awareness of every sound: a distant animal, the groan of a stressed wagon, or the rustle of clothing as soldiers settle for the night. Historians still argue whether rotational watches effectively reduced vulnerability or merely prolonged fatigue. You notice companions sharing blankets or huddling close, small gestures that provide both physical warmth and psychological reassurance. A quirky tidbit: some soldiers would melt snow over fires and pour the water over their boots to soften them for the next day. A minor ritual that was as much about comfort as practicality. As you finally settle down, you take a deep breath, inhaling the cold, crisp air tinged with smoke and wet earth. You feel the bite of the cold on your cheeks and nose, but also a sense of accomplishment. Every step, every improvisation, every small decision has led to this pause in the relentless march. The snow continues to fall silently, creating a blanket that muffles sounds and softens edges, as if the world itself has taken a gentle, patient breath. You lie close to companions, feeling the faint warmth radiating from their bodies, listening to the subtle creaks and groans of wagons, horses, and wood in the cold. In these quiet hours, you begin to understand the rhythm of winter campaigns' movement, improvisation, endurance, and small comforts. Survival is a careful balance, a dance between planning and adaptation, between human ingenuity and the indifferent forces of nature. The day ends not with victory or conquest, but with the simple satisfaction of having endured. The cold is relentless, yet in the shared experience, there is warmth and a profound sense of continuity, of humans finding a way to persist even when the world itself seems frozen around them. You trudge forward, feeling the weight of armour against the bitter wind, and notice how metal that once seemed protective now presses cold and rigid against your body. It is well documented that medieval knights and foot soldiers often struggled with their plate and chainmail in extreme winter, as the cold could sap strength and limit mobility. Each movement feels deliberate, measured, because a misstep could result in a twisted ankle or a fall that no one would quickly notice amidst the drifting snow. The landscape stretches in a quiet monotone, a blend of grey sky and white plains, broken only by the dark silhouettes of horses, wagons, and fellow soldiers. Some accounts note that soldiers improvised additional padding under their armour, tucking wool or even straw between plates to trap warmth. You try a small adjustment of your gloves, wincing as your fingers protest, and realise that improvisation is as essential as discipline. The clinking of chainmail has a strange rhythm in the hush of snowfall, and the occasional creak of a leather strap or the sigh of a horse adds to the auditory texture of the march. Even the scent of wet metal carries with it a faint warmth, a reminder of both life and effort in a world that threatens to freeze everything solid. Movement becomes a careful negotiation with terrain. Ice hidden beneath a thin layer of snow can betray your steps, and you observe how seasoned soldiers use poles or sticks to test footing head. Evidence indicates that columns would often extend their spacing in slippery conditions to prevent mass falls, a practical adaptation that sometimes conflicted with traditional formations. You step cautiously, feeling the crunch of hardened snow underfoot, each step sending small echoes that vanish into the muffled surroundings. Horses shift uneasily, the rhythm of their hooves breaking the monotony and keeping a faint heartbeat in the silence. Your breath rises in tiny clouds that drift in the wind, dissipating almost immediately. Some sources suggest that soldiers occasionally wrapped heated stones in cloth to warm hands or feet temporarily, a small but ingenious practice that could prevent frostbite. You catch sight of a fellow soldier doing just that, hands cupped around the stone, face tilted toward it, a small ritual of relief in a landscape that offers few comforts. The smell of burning straw from nearby fires mingles with the faint tang of leather and fur, a sensory mosaic that is both grounding and poignant. Food remains a constant concern. Hardtack and small scraps of salted meat are consumed in brief pauses, sometimes warmed over the sparse fires. Accounts differ on whether these rations were truly sufficient for extended marches, or whether the real sustenance was psychological, the act of eating. The shared ritual of fire and warmth, you nibble at your ration, noting how even small comforts carry significance, the warmth from a morsel, the flavour of something more than snow, the sense of participation in survival. The occasional sip of barely melted snow offers hydration, though its chill penetrates deep into your throat and stomach. The wind picks up, carrying fine ice particles that sting exposed skin. You adjust your hood and cloak, pressing them closer, and notice how others do the same in subtle gestures of mimicry and instinct. Interestingly, some reports note that soldiers would smear animal fat on exposed skin to reduce frostbite, a practice that seems peculiar now but offered real protection in desperate conditions. The horses snort and paw at snow, and the wagons groan under stress. Every sound is amplified in the quiet, each one signalling movement, struggle, or adjustment in a landscape that feels both immense and intimate. As the day drags on, you observe how commanders attempt to maintain order and pace. Some sources suggest that marches were deliberately slowed during extreme weather to reduce accidents and conserve energy, while others claim strict schedules persisted regardless of conditions. The tension between discipline and survival is palpable. You feel it in the pace, in the careful placement of feet, in the brief exchanges of encouragement or terse commands that float across the snow between groups. It is a rhythm of endurance, a subtle negotiation with both human limitations and environmental extremes. By late afternoon, you and your companions are physically drained. Snow crusts your cloak and hair, dampness creeping into layers. You notice the faint glow of fires ahead, marking where the army intends to pause. Evidence indicates that strategic placement of temporary encampments was crucial to survival. offering protection from wind, easier access to water, and centralized gathering points for rations. You feel an odd comfort in this glimpse of order in a world of chaos, a reminder that even in harsh conditions, structure provides solace. As the evening settles in, the shadows lengthen and the air grows sharper. You step carefully toward the encampment, your ears alert to every sound, the shuffling of snow, the sigh of horses, the distant murmur of voices. Some sources suggest that tents were oriented to maximize wind protection, while others claim soldiers simply adapted to whatever shelter was available. You feel the subtle warmth of bodies gathered around a fire, the faint crackle of flames, and the shared recognition of endurance. In this moment, armoured, tired, and alert, you begin to grasp the fragile balance between preparation, adaptation, and human perseverance that defines winter survival in medieval armies. The snow has become heavier as you push forward, each step dragging slightly more than the last, the cold gnawing at any exposed skin. It is well documented that supply lines were the lifeblood of medieval armies, and when snow buried roads and frozen rivers, the difference between a functioning force and chaos could be measured in miles of trapped wagons. You watch as oxen strain under the weight of wooden carts, their hoofs slipping on hidden ice, tails swishing in frustration, breath rising in thick clouds that vanish almost instantly. The scent of wet straw and animal sweat hangs in the air, mingling with the cold and the subtle tang of iron from armour and weapons. Accounts differ on whether commanders fully appreciated how treacherous winter terrain could be for logistics, or if hubris sometimes outweighed caution. You see soldiers heave at stuck wheels, lifting, levering, and finally scraping away ice with small spades or metal rods. One unusual practice recorded was spreading sand or ashes over icy patches to provide traction for horses and wagons, a simple solution with surprisingly effective results. The rhythm of exertion, the grunts of men, the low moan of strained wood, and the crunch of snow underfoot create a sensory symphony of struggle and persistence. Rations are consumed sparingly during pauses, hardtack, salted pork, and dried fruits offer sustenance, though the chill saps strength as fast as the food replenishes it. Some sources suggest that soldiers would heat meat or bread over fires not just for nourishment, but to offer a small psychological comfort against the relentless monotony of frozen landscapes. You nibble at a piece of hardtack, feeling its dry texture scrape your teeth, and sip water from partially melted snow, noting how the act of eating, however minimal, carries a profound sense of survival and routine in the midst of adversity. The wagons creak and groan, occasionally jolting the soldiers alongside them. It is said that some units reinforced their wagon wheels with iron bands or greased axles to prevent freezing and breaking, an improvisation that could determine the speed and safety of the march. You notice a soldier resting briefly, pressing his hands into a small fire to restore circulation, the flames casting flickering shadows across frost-coated cloaks. Historians debate whether such small comfort significantly reduced injury and frostbite, but the very act of tending to one another suggests an innate understanding of communal survival. Horses and oxen are not just labourers, but companions in endurance. Evidence indicates that animals were often provided with extra straw bedding, hay, or even small rations of grain to keep their energy up in freezing conditions. You watch one horse paw at the snow, shaking off accumulated ice, while its rider tightens a blanket across the saddle. The wind carries a sharp bite, and even the furs and leather that protect bodies and mounts offer only partial relief. The sensory experience is relentless, the sting of ice crystals on cheeks, the scent of damp animals, the soft, almost musical clinking of armour and gear in the quiet of falling snow. Paths through forests or over frozen rivers demand constant vigilance. Some sources suggest scouts would probe the snow ahead with long poles, while others describe soldiers testing the ice with weighted sticks or small sledges. One unusual practice recorded was tying thin ropes between wagons or across the front of columns, providing physical guides when visibility dropped and allowing units to avoid losing members in whiteout conditions. You step carefully, feeling each snowdrift yield underfoot, listening for subtle changes in sound that might indicate hidden dangers. Even the quietest creak or snap becomes significant in this suspended, frozen world. As the day stretches on, soldiers occasionally share whispered instructions or quick encouragement, small moments of human connection that carry more weight than any armour could. Accounts differ on whether morale and communication truly influence survival rates, yet it is undeniable that shared experience strengthens resolve. You feel it in the subtle glances of comrades, the shared labour of moving wagons, and the quiet, almost ceremonial passing of rations. The snow, while isolating, also focuses attention on these minor rituals and human interactions. Evening arrives slowly, the light dimming to a soft grey that merges with the white landscape. Fires are lit at intervals along the column, small beacons against the encroaching cold. Evidence indicates that strategic placement of such fires provided not just warmth but orientation, helping prevent soldiers from straying in the uniform whiteness. You kneel to stir a small flame, inhaling the smoky scent of burning straw, noticing how shadows dance across snow-dusted faces. These moments of warmth, though brief, offer a reprieve and a reminder that endurance depends on both preparation and adaptation. By nightfall, the army slows, fatigue settling into bones and muscles alike. Snow collects on cloaks, horsehair, and wagon covers, forming a thin crust that crunches under the smallest movement. Some sources suggest that soldiers would wrap themselves in extra layers of wet cloth or animal skins, an improvisation that may seem counterintuitive but could trap heat when done carefully. You settle near companions, sharing warmth, listening to the faint groans of stressed wagons and the soft sighs of animals, realizing that survival is not only a matter of strength but of patience, vigilance, and subtle adaptation. Night settles into the camp with a weight that seems almost tangible. Snow falls gently now, muffling sounds, softening the edges of wagons, horses, and soldiers huddled together for warmth. Accounts differ on whether tents or makeshift wooden shelters offered better protection. Yet the men adapt to whatever is available. The smell of damp wool mingles with smoke from small fires struggling against the wind. You wrap your cloak tighter, noticing how each fold traps air and warmth, an improvised shield against the cold that penetrates even the thickest layers of clothing. Some sources suggest that soldiers would dig shallow trenches around tents to reduce drifting snow, while others describe piling branches or hay to form windbreaks. You crouch near a fire, watching companions add sticks and dried brush, listening to the subtle hiss as moisture meets flame. The crackle of burning straw and wood is oddly soothing in contrast to the harsh wind outside. One unusual practice recorded was the use of dung mixed with straw as additional insulation, a method that smelled unpleasant but was surprisingly effective in retaining heat. The sensory reality of winter camp life is relentless biting wind, wet fabrics, and the faint tang of smoke dominate, yet small comforts are enough to sustain morale. Rations are consumed with care. Hardtack and salted meat provide minimal nutrition, but the warmth from a small fire makes the food feel substantial. Evidence indicates that soldiers sometimes boiled meat or soaked bread in hot water to soften it, a practical adaptation that also offered fleeting warmth. You take a bite, feeling the rough texture scrape your tongue, and sip from a flask of melted snow, noting how even the simplest act of nourishment carry profound significance in extreme conditions. Conversations are quiet, whispers exchanged across the firelight, a mix of strategy, encouragement, and muted humour that keeps spirits alive in the cold. The night watch begins, soldiers rotate shifts, ears attuned to every sound. Some reports note that keeping alert during sub-zero nights was as much psychological as practical, with the constant white landscape playing tricks on the mind. You notice the subtle ways companions stay awake, tapping sticks, shifting weight, or murmuring to one another. Evidence indicates that careful watch rotations reduce the risk of frostbite and accidents. Yet fatigue remained an ever-present threat. The snow muffles the world, yet every creak of a wagon or snort of a horse is amplified in the hushed night. Horses and oxen are tended with quiet diligence. Some sources suggest that additional bedding, extra feed, and gentle rubbing of extremities prevented the loss of valuable animals. You crouch beside a horse, feeling its breath warm your fingers, noticing how its coat bristles under the cold. One unusual practice recorded was the rubbing of fat or oil along the legs of animals to protect against ice and wind. A detail that seems odd now but reflects the constant negotiation with environmental extremes. The smell of animals, mingled with smoke and damp wool, creates a distinct olfactory map of life in a winter camp. You glance around the firelight, noticing soldiers improvising small comforts, wrapping cloth around hands, adjusting cloaks, or sharing morsels of food. Accounts differ on whether such practices materially improve survival, yet the psychological benefit is undeniable. The quiet camaraderie, the small acts of care, and the shared awareness of vulnerability forge bonds that feel essential in the face of relentless cold. You reflect on the interplay of preparation, improvisation, and mutual support that define survival in medieval winters. As the night deepens, snow continues to drift, softening shapes and sounds. Fires flicker against tents and wagons, casting long shadows that dance across the frozen landscape. Evidence indicates that even brief moments of warmth and light were crucial, providing both comfort and a practical means to prevent frostbite. You nestle closer to companions, feeling faint heat radiate from shared bodies, listening to subtle rhythms of breathing, animal movement, and the occasional groan of settling wood. The world feels suspended, both serene and demanding, a delicate balance that challenges endurance and fosters resourcefulness. By the time sleep beckons, you feel the accumulation of the day's labour in every muscle, every frozen wheel freed, every ration consumed, every moment spent maintaining warmth has contributed to survival. You understand that winter encampments were not just physical shelters but psychological havens, places where ingenuity, adaptation, and shared effort intersected to preserve life in a harsh environment. Even in the deepest cold, you feel a cautious reassurance, a sense that preparation, attentiveness, and small comforts offer a fragile but meaningful defence against the unforgiving winter night. You awaken to the muted grey light of dawn, the snow falling steadily in tiny, relentless flakes. Records indicate that rations during marches were carefully measured, yet the frigid temperatures sapped energy almost as quickly as the food replenished it. You stretch, feeling the stiffness in your joints, and notice how the cold has seeped even through layered clothing and furs. Every breath forms a small cloud, disappearing instantly into the air, and you realize that moving, even slowly, is an act of resistance against the elements themselves. As the column prepares to advance, you observe the subtle ways soldiers manage both themselves and their animals. Horses are fed and rubbed, oxen nudged to paw at frozen ground, and wagons are inspected to prevent accidents. Some interpretations suggest that these routines were as much about maintaining morale as they were about practical efficiency. The rhythmic repetition of care and movement creates a quiet structure to the day, a ritual that steadies nerves and keeps attention focused amidst the monotony of endless white. Movement is treacherous. Snow hides rocks, ice, and uneven terrain, and contemporary accounts describe soldiers testing each step with poles or shuffling their feet cautiously to avoid slipping. Interestingly, some sources mention the practice of attaching bells to horses or scouts to track positions during low visibility, an improvisation that seems quaint but was effective in preventing stragglers from being lost. You find yourself listening intently to the subtle noises of the column, the soft crunch of snow, the distant groan of wagons, the sighing of animals, each one carrying meaning about safety and progress. Rations are consumed in small, measured bites during brief pauses. Evidence shows that melting snow over fires provided hot water for soups or beverages, offering both hydration and temporary warmth. You nibble at a piece of hardtack softened with the liquid, savouring the slight warmth that contrasts with the biting cold. Some interpretations suggest that these small comforts were critical to sustaining morale, a reminder that the human element of care could rival any strategic planning in importance. The wind carries a sharper edge as the day progresses. You notice how soldiers hunch shoulders and press cloaks closer, adapting instinctively to the environment. Reports from the period describe unusual measures such as rubbing animal fat on exposed skin or on equipment to provide a thin layer of insulation, a practice that seems odd now but was effective in preventing frostbite. You glance at a companion performing this ritual, a small gesture that hints at both creativity and desperation in the struggle to endure. The sensory experience is vivid. The scent of damp leather and wet fur hangs in the air, mingling with faint smoke from fire scattered across the column. The snow muffles distant sounds, making each step and movement sharper in perception. Some sources suggest that soldiers would use subtle auditory cues, like the clinking of metal or the shuffling of hooves, to coordinate movement when visibility was poor. You find that even in the whiteness, human ingenuity creates patterns and signals that help maintain order and cohesion. By afternoon, fatigue is evident across the army. Limbs ache from cold and exertion, and animals show signs of strain. Evidence shows that commanders sometimes slowed marching pace or extended rest periods to mitigate exhaustion, a decision that could be the difference between a successful day and disaster. You walk alongside companions, noting their careful movements, the occasional shared glance, and the quiet words exchanged to keep spirits up. Every small act adjusting a strap, checking a horse's footing, sharing a piece of bread adds to the tapestry of survival. As the day winds down, the army begins to seek shelter once more. Trees and hills provide partial windbreaks, and soldiers improvise with canvas, straw, and branches to create tents and rudimentary huts. Contemporary accounts describe nights where fire placement, even more than blankets or clothing, determine the difference between warmth and chilling exposure. You approach the firelight, letting the faint warmth touch your hands and face, feeling both relief and a lingering awareness of the cold that surrounds you. Even in this frozen landscape, small comforts create pockets of endurance, a delicate equilibrium of preparation, adaptation, and human determination. The army halts briefly to kindle small fires, the smoke curling into the grey morning air. It is documented that fire-making under snow was a critical skill, as warmth and cooked food could mean the difference between frostbite and survival. You kneel to arrange damp twigs and straw, striking sparks with flint and steel. The subtle hiss as snow melts from the heat is oddly comforting, a small reminder that life persists even in this frozen expanse. The scent of wet wood and smoke fills your nostrils, blending with the faint aroma of leather and fur that envelops both soldiers and animals. Some interpretations suggest that the choice of fuel was crucial. Dry wood was scarce in deep winter, so soldiers often resorted to using straw, moss, or even dung mixed with twigs, a practice recorded in chronicles that might seem strange today but was highly practical. You notice companions crumpling small tufts of straw, blowing gently to coax flames, and arranging sticks with care. The act of creating warmth is as much psychological as it is physical, a ritual that fosters a sense of control in an environment otherwise dominated by chaos and cold. Movement around the camp is slow and deliberate. Contemporary accounts describe soldiers constantly adjusting clothing, wringing moisture from boots, and checking straps on armour and saddles. Interestingly, some sources mention that animal fat or grease was rubbed onto armour to prevent snow accumulation and reduce the chilling effect of ice. You catch a glimpse of a soldier performing this task, working methodically, almost meditative in the repetitive motion, and realise that such small preparations accumulate into significant advantages over the course of a harsh winter march. Rations are handled with care, hardtack is softened in hot water, pieces of salted meat are sliced into manageable bites, and hot beverages made from melted snow or weak ale circulate among the men. Evidence shows that even minimal warmth from food or drink had profound effects on maintaining stamina and morale. You sip from a small mug, feeling the liquid run down your throat, warming the core of your body, and appreciate the simple yet vital comforts these temporary fires provide. The wind shifts slightly, carrying fine ice particles that sting your cheeks and ears. Soldiers instinctively hunch, tuck hoods tighter, and press cloaks closer. Accounts differ on whether the effectiveness of these improvisations was fully understood, or if they were simply learned through trial and error. You notice the way even minor adjustments, folding a cloak differently, adding extra padding, or using small bundles of straw and gloves make a noticeable difference in comfort. Each action is a small negotiation with the elements, a negotiation in which even minor oversights can have consequences. The fires serve another purpose beyond warmth. Some sources suggest that their placement helped coordinate the camp, acting as beacons for arriving scouts or stragglers. You watch shadows stretch and dance across the snow, the interplay of light and movement creating a calming rhythm that contrasts with the relentless whiteness outside the immediate circle of warmth. The clink of armour, the low murmur of conversation, and the soft snort of horses combine to form a subtle, almost hypnotic soundtrack to the day's labour. By afternoon, the army begins to prepare for the next stage of movement. Logs are replenished, horses and oxen are checked, and snow is brushed from canvas coverings. Evidence indicates that meticulous preparation at these pauses greatly improved the chances of safely continuing the march. You assist in arranging supplies, noting how small details, from tying down a wagon cover to adjusting a pack strap, create cumulative benefits that protect against the harsh, unpredictable winter. As evening approaches, the wind carries a sharper bite, and the fires take on a deeper glow against the falling snow. Some reports note that soldiers would huddle closely, sharing body heat and stories, engaging in quiet rituals that reinforce camaraderie and morale. You settle near companions, letting the warmth seep into your chilled hands and face, observing the way small flames transform the frozen landscape into a place of temporary safety. In these moments, survival is an intricate interplay of skill, improvisation, and human connection, and you sense that endurance is as much about ingenuity and attention as it is about sheer strength. You awaken to the soft crunch of snow under boots and hooves, a rhythm that feels both steady and fragile in the grey light of dawn. Records indicate that frozen rivers often served as roads for medieval armies, offering relatively flat terrain but concealing hidden dangers beneath a thin, deceptive layer of ice. You step carefully, testing each section with a pole before advancing, listening for subtle cracks that might signal weakness. The landscape is vast and monochrome, stretching endlessly in shades of white and grey, punctuated only by the dark forms of wagons and soldiers, their breath rising in pale clouds that vanish almost as quickly as they form. Accounts differ on whether commanders fully trusted frozen waterways, or if some crossings were forced out of necessity and risk. You watch a wagon tilt slightly as an ox slips on ice, and companions move quickly to stabilize it, boots crunching in unison against the snow. Interestingly, some sources mention that armies sometimes lay down planks or brush to reinforce precarious ice patches, a labour-intensive but life-saving improvisation. You kneel briefly to adjust your own footing, feeling the icy surface shift beneath your weight, and realise that every step is measured, cautious and deliberate. Rations are consumed sparingly as the march continues. Hardtack and small pieces of salted pork sustain energy, though the cold gnaws at strength regardless. Evidence shows that soldiers frequently melted snow to produce hot drinks or soups, offering both hydration and brief warmth. You sip cautiously from a flask, feeling the hot liquid slide down your throat, offering a fleeting relief that contrasts sharply with the biting air. These small rituals, simple as they seem, provide critical sustenance and a sense of normalcy in an otherwise punishing environment. The horses and oxen attended continuously. Contemporary accounts describe extra bedding or straw being added to prevent frostbite, while unusual practices included rubbing fat along legs and hooves to shield from ice and cold. You watch a soldier carefully adjust a horse's blanket, feeling the subtle rise of warmth as the animal shifts against your hands. The soundscape is composed of muted crunches of snow, the soft snort of horses, the groan of wagons under strain, and the occasional murmur of soldiers coordinating movement. Even in this quiet, each sound carries meaning, signalling hazards or progress. The wind picks up, and snow swirls around the column, reducing visibility and heightening the sense of isolation. Some interpretations suggest that bells or small markers were employed to prevent soldiers from becoming separated in whiteout conditions. You glance at companions, noting the subtle nods and gestures used to communicate, the unspoken understanding that vigilance now is as vital as stamina. Even the air itself seems alive, pressing cold against your face and hands, testing patience, coordination, and resolve. By midday, fatigue becomes palpable, limbs ache from constant exertion, muscles stiffen, and every step requires renewed attention. Evidence indicates that periodic pauses, however brief, significantly reduced accidents and maintained cohesion in the column. You find a small mound of snow to rest against, feeling the damp chill seep through your layers, and take a moment to survey the surroundings. The ice beneath your feet groans faintly, and you realise that both terrain and weather dictate the pace as much as any command structure. Food and warmth are still central to survival. Some reports note that soldiers would melt snow near small fires, soaking hardtack to make it more edible and warming their hands in the process. You bite into softened bread, appreciating the minor comforts as morale quietly strengthens. The scent of burning straw, wet leather, and smoke mingles in the crisp air, creating an atmosphere that is simultaneously harsh and strangely intimate. Each sensation, taste, warmth, sound, and touch anchors you to the immediate reality of endurance. As afternoon fades, the column reaches a safer stretch of frozen river. Records indicate that careful scouting and testing of ice thickness determined the route, and minor improvisations like tossing small stones or poles ahead could save lives. You step gingerly, noting the faint vibrations beneath your boots, aware that each measure of attention is a small, necessary strategy for continuing the journey. In these moments, survival is a continuous interplay of vigilance, adaptation, and respect for the environment. A lesson written in the snow and echoed in the rhythm of human and animal effort alike. You trudge through the late morning snow, the world around you quiet except for the faint crunch of boots and the occasional sigh of wind against armoured shoulders. It is recorded that choosing a campsite in winter required careful attention to topography and natural windbreaks, as open fields left men and animals fully exposed to bitter gusts. You glance at the faint contours of a ridge ahead, the trees along its crest offering partial shelter, and recognize that selecting even a small advantage could mean the difference between a tolerable night and frostbite. The air carries the mingled scents of damp wool, smoke from small fires, and the faint musk of animals crowded together, a complex bouquet of life in a frozen environment. Some interpretations suggest that positioning tents near natural obstacles like hills or thick stands of trees not only reduced wind exposure but also improved morale, giving soldiers a subtle sense of security. You adjust your cloak and furs, feeling how each layer traps precious warmth, and notice companions huddled around small embers, hands cupped close, faces red from exertion and cold. The firelight flickers across snow-dusted armour, creating shifting shadows that make the landscape feel alive despite the harsh chill. A curious detail is that some units place small stones heated in the fire near sleeping areas to provide supplemental warmth. A minor innovation that offered surprisingly effective relief against numb fingers and toes. Movement to the chosen campsite is slow and deliberate. Evidence suggests that soldiers often scouted ahead in pairs or small groups, using poles to probe icy ground or hidden snowdrifts. You watch a pair of scouts tapping the frozen surface ahead, listening for subtle changes in sound that might indicate weakness in the ice beneath. Oddly, some accounts describe the use of rope lines tied between wagons and tents to prevent anyone from wandering away in whiteout conditions. A simple adaptation that speaks volumes about the constant vigilance required in winter campaigns. As the column begins to settle, rations are carefully distributed. Contemporary accounts describe hardtack soaked in hot water, small portions of salted meat, and rare bits of cheese or fruit as precious commodities. You nibble on softened bread, savouring the warmth it provides as the firelight glints off nearby armour. Experts continue to explore whether these small meals were sufficient for sustained exertion, or if the mental reassurance of ritualized eating was as important as physical sustenance. Every bite, every sip of warmed snow water, contributes to a delicate balance of energy, morale, and endurance. The animals are tended meticulously. Records indicate that horses and oxen were given extra bedding and feed, sometimes supplemented with hay or straw from nearby villages. Remarkably, reports describe soldiers applying animal fat to hooves and lower legs to shield against ice and snow accumulation, a makeshift insulation that demonstrates creativity born of necessity. You kneel beside a horse, feeling the warmth radiate through its body as it exhales, and are reminded that these creatures are as essential to survival as any soldier, carrying both supplies and hope through the harsh landscape. The wind carries the scent of snow-laden branches and faint smoke from distant fires. Accounts differ on whether continuous vigilance during setup of the camp truly prevented accidents, or if luck played an equal role. Yet every precaution is observed. Canvas flaps are secured, ropes tightened, and stakes driven carefully into frozen ground. You help adjust a wagon cover, feeling the subtle resistance of ice-crusted wood, and notice how even minor oversights could have cascading consequences in the cold, unforgiving environment. By late afternoon, the camp is largely arranged. Soldiers tend to fires, distribute rations, and prepare bedding, creating pockets of warmth and security amidst the overwhelming whiteness. Evidence suggests that careful attention to these details significantly reduced nighttime injuries and allowed the army to maintain cohesion. You sit near a fire, feeling the heat seep into chilled hands and boots, listening to quiet murmurs, the soft crunch of snow from shifting animals, and the occasional metallic clink of armour as someone adjusts gear. Survival here is an intricate dance of observation, improvisation, and simple human resilience. As evening approaches, The shadows lengthen across snowdrifts, and the air grows sharper. Some interpretations suggest that these small moments of calm and preparation were critical for both mental and physical endurance. You settle close to companions, the warmth from bodies and fires blending into a comforting cocoon. Each flicker of flame, each shared movement, each careful adjustment of gear reinforces the fragile equilibrium that allows the army to endure another night. In this frozen, hushed world, preparation, creativity, and subtle teamwork merge into survival. And you sense the quiet triumph in simply making it through another day. The next morning dawns pale and heavy, a thin layer of frost coating cloaks, boots, and the edges of tents. Records indicate that careful attention to routine could prevent minor discomforts from escalating into serious injury. And you feel this in every movement. Your fingers stiffen as you adjust straps and furs, and each step across the hardened snow demands awareness. The column begins to stir, a low murmur of voices and the soft clatter of armor forming the subtle soundtrack of a world awakening under a white sky. Some interpretations suggest that soldiers who adhered to consistent morning routines feeding animals, clearing snow, and inspecting equipment fared better over extended campaigns, both physically and psychologically. You notice companions testing wagon wheels, adjusting harnesses, and stirring small fires to revive embers from the previous night. Interestingly, reports note that soldiers sometimes melted snow in small pouches or containers to produce warmer water for washing hands and faces. A minor comfort that improved morale and reduced the stiffness of frozen joints. Every detail, no matter how small, is magnified by the cold and scarcity. The march resumes across a gently sloping valley, and the terrain challenges every step. Evidence shows that soldiers often used poles or sticks to test snow depth and ice thickness before committing their weight, while some scouts carried thin ropes to guide stragglers safely through tricky areas. You hear the crunch of snow beneath boots and the rhythmic snort of horses, feeling the subtle vibration as each wagon shifts over frozen ground. Oddly, some units reportedly added straw or small branches beneath wagon wheels to prevent freezing in place, an improvised solution that demonstrates ingenuity born of necessity. Rations are consumed sparingly as the march continues. Contemporary accounts describe small portions of hardtack, salted meats, and occasionally dried fruit, intended to sustain energy without waste. Experts continue to explore whether these minimal rations were sufficient for the physical exertion demanded by snow-laden marches, or if the primary benefit was psychological. The simple act of eating offering reassurance against the endless white. You nibble at a piece of softened hardtack, feeling warmth trickle into your core, and notice the subtle, calming effect of routine amidst the relentless environment. The animals require constant attention. Records indicate that horses and oxen received extra bedding and feed, and some unusual practices included applying animal fat or grease to hooves and lower legs to prevent ice accumulation. You kneel to smooth a horse's blanket, feeling warmth from its body seep into your chilled hands. The subtle scent of wet fur and hay mingles with smoke from distant fires, forming a sensory tapestry that reflects both hardship and life persisting in extreme conditions. The wind picks up as clouds shift across the pale sky, sending fine ice crystals stinging faces and glinting in the dim light. Some sources suggest that small bells or markers attached to scouts or animals helped maintain orientation in low visibility. You watch a scout carefully probe ahead with a long stick, listening for the faint creak of ice or hidden dips in the snow. Each careful measurement, each deliberate step is a negotiation with the environment, a reminder that vigilance can be as valuable as physical strength. By midday, fatigue settles into bodies and animals alike. Evidence shows that periodic pauses, even brief ones, allowed muscles to recover, wagons to be inspected, and snow-clearing tasks to be completed, preventing injuries and maintaining cohesion. You rest momentarily, feeling the damp chill penetrate layers, and notice companions sharing small comforts, adjusting furs, offering morsels of food, and exchanging quiet words. These simple interactions, seemingly mundane, become essential in sustaining endurance over long, harsh days. As afternoon approaches, the column navigates toward a sheltered ridge, a subtle rise that promises partial relief from the wind. Contemporary accounts describe the relief of even minor terrain advantages, offering warmth and protection from drifting snow. You step carefully, testing every footing, and feel a small sense of accomplishment as the column negotiates the slope without incident. The march continues, a delicate balance of strategy, improvisation, and attention to detail, proving that survival in the harsh winter is as much about mindfulness and care as it is about strength and courage. The cold morning air bites at your cheeks as you break camp, snow clinging stubbornly to cloaks and armour. Contemporary accounts describe how morning routines in winter campaigns were meticulously structured, from feeding animals to inspecting wagons, ensuring that the army could continue moving despite the harsh conditions. You feel the stiffness in your limbs as you adjust straps and fur layers, noticing the subtle interplay between clothing, armour, and exposed skin. Each step across the hardened snow is deliberate, every movement measured, and the silence of the white landscape magnifies the small sounds of life, the crunch of boots, the soft snort of horses, the occasional creak of wood underweight. Evidence shows that winter campaigns required soldiers to constantly improvise. Some interpretations suggest that the clever use of straw or moss in gloves and boots provided critical insulation, a technique born of experience and necessity rather than formal instruction. You notice a companion adjusting padding beneath chainmail, the faint aroma of damp wool mixing with the earthy scent of thawing snow. Even the smallest innovations have a tangible effect, reminding you that survival is often the sum of minor, thoughtful actions repeated consistently. As the column moves forward, you encounter the first shallow ice patches of the day. Records indicate that scouting and testing terrain were essential for preventing accidents, with soldiers using poles or sticks to probe the snow and ice. Oddly, some reports describe units scattering sand or ashes across icy stretches to improve traction for horses and wagons. You pause to observe this technique in action, the grains crunching underfoot as the animals carefully navigate the surface, and you marvel at the ingenuity hidden in such simple measures. Rations are consumed during short halts, often in silence, each bite a reminder of the thin line between endurance and exhaustion. Contemporary accounts describe hardtack soaked in melted snow or water, bits of salted meat, and occasionally dried fruit or cheese. Experts continue to explore whether the nutritional value of these rations was adequate for the exertion required, or if their primary role was psychological, offering comfort and routine in an otherwise unrelenting environment. You nibble at softened bread, savouring its warmth and the fleeting sense of normalcy it provides. As the wind presses against your back and the snow swirls across the frozen landscape, the animals require constant care. Evidence suggests that horses and oxen were often given extra bedding, and unusual practices included applying animal fat or grease to hooves to prevent ice from forming. You kneel to smooth a horse's blanket, feeling the warmth radiate into your frozen hands. The scent of damp fur mingles with smoke from small fires scattered along the column, forming a sensory tapestry that is simultaneously harsh and intimate. Each minor act of care reinforces the interdependence between soldiers and animals, a critical relationship in a frozen world. The wind carries sharp flakes that sting your face, and visibility is reduced as clouds shift across the pale sky. Some interpretations suggest that scouts use subtle signals, such as bells or faint whistles, to maintain orientation and communicate hazards across the column. You watch carefully, adjusting your pace and observing companions, noting the subtle rhythm of movement and communication that keeps the group together. Every footfall, every careful adjustment, every shared glance forms a silent language of survival. By mid-afternoon, fatigue begins to weigh on both men and animals. Evidence indicates that brief pauses allowed the column to recover, inspect wagons, and prepare for the next leg of the march, significantly reducing accidents and frost-related injuries. You rest momentarily, feeling the snow soften underfoot as the sun attempts to penetrate the grey sky. Companions share small comforts, adjusting furs, offering morsels of food, exchanging quiet words of encouragement. These interactions, seemingly minor, become essential threads in the fabric of endurance. As the day progresses, the column approaches a ridge offering partial shelter from wind and drifting snow. Records show that even subtle terrain advantages could provide relief. Reducing exposure and improving morale, you step carefully, testing each patch of ice and snow, and feel a faint sense of reassurance as the soldiers navigate without incident. The combination of careful observation, thoughtful improvisation, and constant attentiveness illustrates that winter survival in medieval armies was a dynamic interplay of human skill, environmental awareness, and resilient ingenuity. You awake to a grey, wind-whipped morning, the snow thickening in layers over tents and wagons. Contemporary sources indicate that careful selection of campsites could mitigate exposure to the fiercest gusts. But even the best locations offered only partial protection. You step outside, feeling the crunch of hardened snow underfoot and the sharp sting of icy air on your face. The cold penetrates clothing layers, reminding you that even fur and wool are no match for persistent winter. Each breath you exhale rises in pale clouds, and the faint scent of smoke from small fires mingles with the dampness of snow and leather. Accounts vary on whether soldiers truly benefited from prearranged camp positions, or if improvisation was more critical to survival. You notice companions testing the ground for uneven patches and adjusting wagon covers to prevent snow accumulation. Oddly enough, some soldiers were reported to melt snow on cloth and place it inside boots to create temporary warmth, a curious yet effective technique that reveals the resourcefulness demanded by these campaigns. You wrap your cloak tighter, aware that every small measure counts when the environment conspires against you. The march resumes as the column navigates a shallow, snow-filled valley. Evidence demonstrates that scouts often moved ahead to probe ice-covered terrain or test snowdrifts with poles, reducing accidents and ensuring the main body could proceed safely. You step carefully, listening to the subtle crunch beneath boots and the soft snort of horses, each sound amplified by the hush of snow. Remarkably, some units were known to use straw or moss tied to wagons to prevent them from freezing into place, an improvisation that saved both time and energy. Rations are carefully distributed during brief pauses. Records show that hardtack, salted meat, and the occasional piece of dried fruit formed the backbone of the diet. Supplemented by hot water made from melted snow, you nibble on softened bread, savouring its warmth as it travels down your throat, a temporary reprieve from the chill. Some scholars propose that the psychological benefit of these small rituals eating in warmth. Sipping a hot drink was as important as the nutrition itself, offering comfort and continuity amidst relentless hardship. Animals remained central to the march. Contemporary sources indicate that horses and oxen received extra straw bedding and were checked frequently for signs of fatigue or frostbite. Interestingly, reports mention that soldiers would apply grease or fat to hooves to prevent ice buildup, a small but effective method that demonstrates the ingenuity of those who endured these conditions. You kneel beside a horse, feeling its body heat radiate through your gloves, and realize that the care of animals is inseparable from human survival in these frozen landscapes. The wind intensifies, carrying fine ice particles that sting skin and make visibility difficult. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding the most effective ways soldiers maintained cohesion in whiteout conditions, though evidence suggests the use of small markers, bells, and subtle signals to prevent stragglers from being lost. You watch as companions nod quietly to each other, coordinating movement and communication with gestures and minimal sound. Each step is measured, deliberate, a negotiation with both terrain and environment. By afternoon, fatigue becomes apparent, limbs ache, muscles stiffen, and even the animals show signs of strain. Documentation reveals that brief pauses, careful attention to wagons, and routine checks significantly improve the odds of continued movement. You pause to adjust your furs and watch companions tending to their mounts, exchanging quiet words, sharing small morsels of food, and performing minor adjustments to gear. These subtle, repeated actions weave a fabric of endurance that holds the column together despite the unforgiving cold. As the day wanes, the column approaches a gentle rise that offers partial shelter from the wind. Contemporary sources indicate that small elevations, dense tree clusters, or minor depressions were strategically chosen to protect from drifting snow and conserve heat. You step cautiously, testing every patch of ice, feeling the snow give slightly beneath your boots. The firelight from other soldiers' small stoves flickers across the landscape, casting shadows and creating pockets of warmth. It is in these small victories maintaining cohesion, tending to animals, and creating temporary warmth that the art of winter survival becomes evident. An ongoing negotiation between human ingenuity and the indifferent forces of nature. The morning light filters weakly through thick, low-hanging clouds, and the snow glitters faintly under its muted glow. Evidence demonstrates that prolonged exposure to wind and cold could quickly sap strength, making careful attention to clothing and layering essential for soldiers and animals alike. You adjust your furs and woolen garments, feeling the stiffness in your joints from the previous day's exertions. Every breath is sharp, almost metallic in taste, and the constant crunch of boots in snow forms a rhythmic accompaniment to the faint groaning of wagons and snorting of horses. Accounts differ on whether pre-planned routes or on-the-fly navigation offered the best protection against hidden hazards. You notice scouts moving ahead, probing the snow with long poles, and marking areas of thin ice or treacherous footing. Interestingly, some reports describe soldiers tying small bells to their mounts or sleds so that their location could be tracked in low visibility. These minor improvisations, though seemingly trivial, contributed directly to the safety of the column, reinforcing the idea that survival often depended on ingenuity as much as preparation. Rations are distributed as brief pauses occur along the march. Records show that hardtack and salted meat were staples, often supplemented with dried fruits or occasionally small amounts of cheese. You nibble at a piece softened in hot water from melted snow, the warmth travelling slowly through your body, offering a fleeting reprieve from the biting cold. Some scholars propose that these small rituals provided psychological comfort, creating structure and normalcy amid relentless monotony and discomfort. The animals continue to demand constant care. Evidence indicates that horses and oxen receive not only extra bedding but also attention to prevent ice buildup on hooves and lower legs. Remarkably, reports note that soldiers applied animal fat or grease to exposed areas of animals' legs to reduce frost accumulation. A simple yet effective adaptation. You kneel briefly to adjust a horse's blanket, feeling warmth radiate from the animal, and realize that their well-being is inseparable from your own. The subtle scent of damp fur, mixed with smoke from small fires, defines the olfactory landscape of winter campaigning. Wind gusts intensify in the afternoon, carrying ice crystals that sting cheeks and hands, even through multiple layers. Some interpretations suggest that soldiers would use small markers or subtle gestures to maintain orientation and cohesion, particularly when visibility deteriorated. You watch companions adjusting wagon covers, tethering animals carefully, and signalling quietly, creating a coordinated rhythm that balances risk, movement, and endurance. Each act, each step, is deliberate, reflecting constant negotiation with the elements. By late afternoon, fatigue is increasingly apparent. Limbs ache, muscles tighten, and every step demands renewed attention. Documentation reveals that regular pauses, careful tending of animals, and meticulous adjustment of gear significantly improve survival rates. You pause to warm your hands near a small fire, observing companions performing similar tasks, sharing brief words of reassurance or small morsels of food. These small, repeated actions help maintain cohesion and morale, proving essential in an environment that is as unforgiving as it is mesmerizing. As the day draws to a close, the column searches for a ridge or stand of trees to shield against wind and drifting snow. Evidence demonstrates that even minor terrain advantages could provide crucial relief, conserving warmth and energy for both men and animals. You step cautiously, testing every patch of ice, noting subtle variations in texture beneath your boots. Fires are lit, smoke curling into the muted sky, casting flickering shadows on snow-laden tents and wagons in these quiet moments. Survival is a combination of preparation, observation, and creative adaptation, and you feel a quiet satisfaction in having navigated another day through winter's relentless grasp. The dawn arrives with a faint, silvery light, illuminating the frost-coated tents and the wagons lined up like soldiers themselves. Records show that winter marches demanded careful attention to timing and daily routines, as even minor miscalculations could result in accidents or exhaustion. You step out into the crisp air, feeling the snow crunch beneath your boots and the sting of icy wind across your cheeks. The smell of damp wool and faint smoke from smouldering fires lingers, a reminder that survival depends on constant vigilance and preparation. Accounts vary on whether early rising was always beneficial or if it sometimes led to fatigue. Yet you observe the soldiers moving with deliberate efficiency, adjusting cloaks, checking harnesses, and ensuring that supplies are secured. Interestingly, reports note that some soldiers would place heated stones in small pouches near their hands or feet to ward off numbness, a simple yet clever method to maintain circulation. You adjust your gloves, feeling the subtle warmth from these small measures, and recognize that survival often relies on such modest but thoughtful innovations. The march resumes across a gently rolling landscape. Evidence demonstrates that scouting ahead remained essential, with poles used to probe snowdrifts and ice, and occasional rope lines guiding the column through treacherous patches. You notice a scout carefully testing each step, the soft clinking of a metal tip against frozen ground blending with the faint crunch of boots and hooves. Oddly enough, some units scattered straw or branches across icy sections to improve traction, a pragmatic adaptation that reflects both ingenuity and necessity. Every movement is calculated, each footfall a small negotiation with the environment. Rations are consumed sparingly during short halts. Contemporary sources indicate that hardtack, salted meat, and occasionally dried fruits or cheese provided sustenance. Supplemented with hot water made from melted snow, you nibble at softened bread, appreciating the warmth that travels slowly through your body. A brief counterpoint to the relentless cold. Some scholars propose that the ritual of eating in these pauses reinforced morale, providing structure and reassurance in an otherwise monotonous and punishing landscape. The animals remained central to progress, Evidence shows that horses and oxen received extra bedding and careful inspection to prevent frostbite and exhaustion. Remarkably, reports describe soldiers applying fat or grease to hooves and legs to reduce ice accumulation, an unusual but effective method of protection. You kneel to adjust a horse's blanket, feeling the gentle warmth radiate into your hands, the scents of wet fur, straw, and smoke mix in the air, creating a vivid sensory environment that reinforces both the difficulty and the continuity of life in winter marches. The wind begins to shift, sending fine ice crystals stinging exposed skin. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding the most effective formations to protect soldiers and animals, though evidence suggests that small signals, subtle gestures, and markers helped maintain cohesion. You watch companions communicate quietly, nodding and adjusting movement with a precision born from experience. Each act is deliberate, each motion significant, as the column navigates through terrain that constantly tests both skill and patience. By mid-afternoon, the fatigue of repeated exertions becomes tangible. Limbs ache, muscles stiffen, and even the animals show signs of strain. Documentation reveals that periodic pauses and careful attention to wagons, animals, and clothing markedly improved the likelihood of survival. You rest briefly against a mound of snow, observing companions performing small acts of care, adjusting furs, checking straps, sharing morsels of food. These minor gestures create a cumulative sense of security and cohesion, essential in the relentless winter landscape. As the day approaches evening, the column reaches a small rise that offers partial protection from the wind. Contemporary sources indicate that selecting subtle terrain advantages was crucial for conserving energy and maintaining warmth. You step carefully, testing each patch of ice, and observe the flickering of small fires across the ridge. Shadows dance against snow-laden wagons and tents, providing a soft, calming contrast to the harsh whiteness of the day. In these quiet, deliberate moments, the art of endurance becomes clear. It is a careful balance of preparation, improvisation, and the constant negotiation between human ingenuity and the relentless forces of nature. You trudge onward as the pale winter sun barely rises above the horizon, casting long, diffuse shadows across the snow-laden landscape. Evidence demonstrates that medieval armour often relied on both natural features and improvised windbreaks to create temporary shelters along marches. You adjust your furs and cloak, feeling the stiff chill seep through layered fabrics, and notice how companions move with similar careful deliberation, each step measured and purposeful. The crunch of snow under boots and the occasional groan of stressed wagons punctuate the quiet, lending a rhythm to the otherwise still world. Accounts differ on whether winter encampments were planned with precise foresight or largely improvised based on immediate needs. You see soldiers scouting ahead, testing frozen terrain with long poles, and adjusting wagon positions to reduce strain on wheels and axles. Oddly enough, some sources describe soldiers placing small stones or heated metal near their feet or hands to stave off numbness, a simple yet surprisingly effective method of temporary warmth. You take a moment to adjust your own gloves, noticing the slight comfort even minor warmth can provide against the relentless cold. Rations are handled with precision. Contemporary accounts indicate that hardtack, salted meats, and dried fruit were rationed to maintain energy without exhausting supplies. You nibble on softened bread, feeling its warmth spread slowly through your chest, while sipping water made from melted snow. Some historians propose that these brief, ritualized meals provided more than sustenance. They reinforced routine and morale, small anchors of order in an otherwise unpredictable environment. Every bite, every sip, becomes a quiet assertion of survival against the cold. The animals demand attention as constantly as the men, Records reveal that horses and oxen were often provided with extra straw bedding and occasional supplemental feed to maintain energy. Interestingly, some units applied animal fat to hooves and legs to prevent ice accumulation, a practice that may seem odd now but was vital for ensuring mobility. You kneel beside a horse, smoothing its blanket and feeling the warmth radiate into your chilled fingers. The mingling scents of damp fur, smoke, and wet wool form a sensory tapestry of life amidst the harshness of winter. The wind increases as the march continues, sending fine snow and ice particles stinging exposed skin. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding whether tighter formations or looser arrangements best reduced accidents. Yet small signals and subtle gestures were clearly critical for maintaining cohesion. You observe companions nodding silently, adjusting positions, and checking equipment in a synchronized rhythm. Each action, each subtle movement, is a negotiation with the environment, a constant calibration to preserve both safety and momentum. By midday, fatigue is evident. Limbs ache, muscles tighten, and even the animals show weariness. Documentation shows that brief pauses, careful monitoring of wagons, and consistent attention to clothing and bedding substantially increased the likelihood of reaching the next camp intact. You rest briefly on a snow mound, observing companions performing similar tasks, adjusting furs, sharing small morsels of food, tending to horses. The subtle interplay of vigilance, care, and routine forms an invisible support network, ensuring the survival of the column. As afternoon progresses, the army nears a ridge that promises partial shelter from wind and drifting snow. Contemporary accounts indicate that such minor terrain advantages could dramatically reduce exposure and conserve both warmth and energy. You step cautiously, testing patches of ice, and notice small fires flickering along the ridge, casting comforting shadows. In these moments, endurance is not only about strength but also about observation, creativity, and attention to detail. The combination of preparation, improvisation, and teamwork allows the column to navigate another day in the relentless winter, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of those who endured it. The morning air carries a sharp, almost metallic bite, and you feel the stiffness in your muscles from days of marching through snow and ice. Documentation reveals that prolonged exposure to cold, combined with heavy exertion, could quickly lead to fatigue and frostbite if routine precautions were neglected. You adjust your cloak and furs, feeling the weight of layered fabrics against your shoulders, and notice how your companions move deliberately, each step measured to conserve energy. The world around you is hushed, snow falling in delicate flakes that muffle distant sounds, making the clink of armor and the soft crunch of boots underfoot all the more pronounced. Accounts differ on whether mental resilience played as large a role as physical preparedness in enduring these conditions. You see soldiers whispering brief instructions, offering encouragement, or sharing small morsels of food, subtle gestures that fortify morale. Remarkably, some soldiers were known to warm stones in embers and tuck them into gloves or boots to stave off numbness, a simple yet effective practice that reflects the resourcefulness demanded by harsh winter conditions. You adjust your own gloves, feeling the faint warmth and a renewed sense of alertness. The march continues across frozen plains and shallow valleys, each step requiring careful observation. Contemporary sources indicate that scouts tested snowdrifts and icy patches with poles, while wagons were sometimes reinforced with branches or straw to prevent freezing in place. Oddly enough, soldiers occasionally rubbed salted pork fat onto leather straps and boots to protect against ice accumulation, a makeshift solution that was surprisingly effective in maintaining mobility. You step cautiously, noting subtle vibrations in the snow beneath your boots and the slight creak of wagons, each sound carrying information about hidden hazards. Rations are consumed at periodic halts. Evidence demonstrates that hardtack, salted meats, and dried fruits provided necessary sustenance, while hot water from melted snow or weak ale offered temporary warmth. Some historians propose that these small, ritualized meals were critical for mental endurance, providing a sense of routine and comfort amidst the monotony and hardship. You nibble at softened hardtack, feeling warmth travel into your chest, appreciating the subtle reassurance it brings against the relentless cold. Animals remain central to the march. Records reveal that horses and oxen were carefully tended with extra bedding, supplemental feed, and periodic inspection for frostbite or fatigue. Interestingly, some units applied animal fat to hooves and lower legs to prevent ice accumulation, a small but essential innovation that preserved both speed and safety. You kneel briefly beside a horse, smoothing its blanket and feeling the gentle heat radiate into your frozen fingers. The combined scent of wet fur, damp wool, and smoke creates an unmistakable sensory signature of life persisting in the harsh winter landscape. The wind shifts, carrying fine ice crystals that sting cheeks and expose skin. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding the optimal marching formations in low visibility. Yet subtle gestures, ropes, and markers were clearly crucial for preventing stragglers. You observe companions coordinating silently, adjusting wagon positions and animal spacing, and notice the quiet efficiency of their movements. Every act, no matter how small, is a careful negotiation with the environment, a balance between maintaining pace and preserving energy. By afternoon, the army shows signs of cumulative fatigue. Limbs ache, muscles tighten, and even the animals exhibit weariness. Contemporary sources indicate that regular pauses for feeding, checking gear, and tending to animals dramatically increase the likelihood of reaching the next encampment safely. You rest briefly, noticing companions performing similar routines, adjusting furs, sharing small pieces of food, and offering quiet encouragement. These repeated actions, though subtle, weave an essential network of support that sustains the column through relentless winter conditions. As evening approaches, the column edges toward a ridge that offers partial shelter from wind and drifting snow. Evidence demonstrates that even minor terrain advantages could preserve warmth, conserve energy, and provide psychological relief. You step carefully, testing icy patches and observing the flickering of small fires along the ridge. In these moments, endurance is as much about observation, creativity, and teamwork as it is about strength. Each decision, each adjustment, each small act of care contributes to survival, a delicate balance between human ingenuity and the unforgiving forces of winter. Snow swirls around you as the army resumes its march, softening the outlines of trees, wagons, and distant hills. Contemporary accounts indicate that camouflage became a necessary consideration during winter maneuvers, with soldiers sometimes donning white cloaks or wrapping themselves in blankets to blend with the snow. You tug your own cloak tighter, noticing how subtle adjustments can both conserve warmth and reduce visibility. The air is crisp and carries the scent of damp wool, smoke from small fires, and the faint musk of horses and oxen, forming a complex sensory backdrop for the day's labour. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding how effective snow camouflage truly was in preventing ambushes, yet its use appears frequently in chronicles of winter campaigns. You watch a scout step lightly ahead, moving deliberately across a snowdrift, and realise that each movement is both tactical and practical, balancing stealth with careful attention to footing. Oddly enough, some units would crush snow underfoot to create a firmer surface or mark a path, a subtle adaptation that aided both reconnaissance and cohesion. Rations are consumed at intermittent pauses. Evidence demonstrates that hardtack and salted meats were staples, sometimes accompanied by melted snow for hot drinks. Providing both energy and psychological comfort, you take a slow bite, feeling warmth spread through your chest, and sip the near-boiling water, relishing the contrast to the biting cold. Some historians propose that these small rituals of nourishment, repetition, and shared pause were as crucial to survival as the physical protection offered by furs and armour. The animals continue to require constant attention. Records reveal that horses and oxen were given extra bedding and frequently inspected for frostbite or fatigue, with some soldiers applying fat or grease to lower legs to prevent ice buildup. Remarkably, these minor interventions often determine whether animals could continue hauling wagons or needed to be rested. You kneel to adjust a horse's blanket, feeling warmth radiate through its body and appreciating the interdependence between human and animal endurance. The wind rises in strength as the day progresses, sending sharp ice particles across your face and hands. Some interpretations suggest that small signals, subtle gestures, and physical markers were crucial for maintaining cohesion and preventing stragglers. You observe companions nodding quietly, adjusting positions, and moving in a coordinated rhythm that reflects experience and instinct. Each action is a negotiation with the elements, an exercise in vigilance that keeps the column intact and moving. By midday, fatigue becomes evident throughout the column, limbs ache, muscles tighten, and even the animals exhibit weariness. Documentation shows that scheduled pauses, attentive maintenance of wagons, and careful tending of animals markedly improve the likelihood of reaching subsequent camps safely. You rest momentarily against a snow-covered mound, observing companions performing similar tasks, adjusting furs, sharing morsels of food, and offering brief words of encouragement, these repeated. Subtle acts are the invisible framework supporting the survival of the entire group. As afternoon advances, the column approaches a ridge that promises partial shelter from wind and drifting snow. Contemporary sources indicate that minor elevations, stands of trees, or depressions could provide not only physical protection, but also psychological relief. A momentary sense of safety in a vast and indifferent landscape. You step cautiously, testing icy patches, and notice the flickering glow of small fires that illuminate the ridge. In these quiet moments, endurance becomes an intricate balance of observation, improvisation, teamwork, and careful attention to detail, proving that survival in medieval winter campaigns depended as much on ingenuity and vigilance as it did on strength or numbers. The camp awakens under a muted sky, the snow falling steadily and dusting tents, wagons, and animals with a thin, sparkling layer. Contemporary sources indicate that hygiene during winter marches was minimal, yet even small measures could prevent illness from spreading among soldiers. You notice men scraping ice from boots, adjusting damp cloaks, and shaking out wet wool to reduce the chill pressing against their bodies. The scent of smoke from small fires mingles with the damp tang of leather and fur, creating a vivid reminder that survival is as much about small details as it is about endurance. Accounts vary on whether maintaining cleanliness in such conditions actually reduced disease, but routine inspections and basic washing appear consistently in chronicles. Oddly enough, some soldiers would melt snow to wash their faces and hands, a simple act that offered both physical relief and psychological comfort. You bend to stir a small fire, feeling the heat radiate into frozen fingers and inhale the smoky, earthy aroma that seems to anchor the senses in a world otherwise dominated by white and cold. Rations are distributed with care. Records show that hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruit were the staples, while hot water or weak ale provided warmth and hydration. Some historians propose that the ritualized preparation and consumption of food offered a mental reprieve, reinforcing routine and maintaining morale even in the bleakest conditions. You nibble at a softened piece of bread, feeling the faint warmth seep through your chest and limbs, a reminder of the tiny comforts that sustain life in extreme circumstances. Animals are tended meticulously. Evidence suggests that horses and oxen were given extra bedding, supplemented with hay or straw, and inspected for frostbite. Remarkably, soldiers would apply animal fat or grease to hooves and lower legs to prevent ice accumulation, a method that seems peculiar now but proved vital for continued mobility. You kneel beside a horse, feeling the subtle heat radiate through its body, and realize that their well-being is inseparable from human survival on these winter campaigns. The wind shifts suddenly, sending sharp ice crystals across the landscape and stinging faces and hands. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding the most effective marching formations under such conditions, but visual and auditory signals appear to have been critical for maintaining cohesion. You notice companions adjusting positions, exchanging subtle gestures, and keeping a careful eye on animals and wagons. Each movement, each small decision, is part of an ongoing negotiation with both the environment and the demands of the march. By mid-afternoon, fatigue is noticeable, limbs ache, muscles tighten, and even the animals move with a slower, deliberate rhythm. Documentation reveals that brief rest periods, careful tending of gear, and consistent attention to animals greatly improve the odds of continuing safely. You pause to stretch, observing companions performing similar tasks, sharing morsels of food, and quietly tending fires. These minor actions accumulate, reinforcing cohesion, stamina, and the subtle rhythms of endurance that allow the column to persist. As the day progresses, the column approaches a gently sloping ridge that offers some protection from the wind. Contemporary accounts indicate that even modest terrain advantages could conserve warmth, energy, and morale. You step carefully, testing patches of ice and snow, noting how the faint flicker of fires across the ridge provides both guidance and comfort. In these moments, survival emerges as a delicate interplay of careful observation, improvisation, teamwork, and the small, repeated gestures that sustain life in an unforgiving winter landscape. The morning light arrives dim and diffuse, filtering through thick clouds and reflecting softly off the snow-covered landscape. Documentation reveals that winter marches demanded constant vigilance, not only to the terrain but also to the well-being of men and animals. You adjust your cloak and furs, feeling the stiffness in your joints from days of trudging through snow and ice. The crunch of boots, the creak of wagons, and the occasional snort of horses create a subtle rhythm that marks the slow, deliberate progress of the column. Accounts differ on whether commanders relied more on planned routes or on-the-spot decisions to navigate winter hazards, but it is clear that both preparation and adaptability were critical. You watch a scout probe ahead with a long pole, carefully testing snow and ice for hidden dangers. Oddly enough, some units carried small pouches of heated stones to tuck into boots or gloves, a minor improvisation that provided brief warmth for soldiers in otherwise relentless cold. You do the same, feeling a faint, comforting heat seep through layers of wool and leather. Rations are consumed with quiet focus. Contemporary sources indicate that hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruit were the standard fare, occasionally supplemented with hot water from melted snow. Some historians propose that these small, ritualized meals reinforced both physical stamina and morale, creating a brief sense of normalcy and comfort amid the endless wait. You nibble at softened bread, feeling the warmth travel through your chest, while glancing at companions performing similar routines, their faces red from exertion and cold. Animals remain a central concern. Evidence suggests that horses and oxen received extra bedding, supplemental feed, and careful inspection to prevent frostbite. Remarkably, soldiers would sometimes smear animal fat or Grease along hooves and lower legs to prevent ice accumulation. A simple yet effective technique. You kneel beside a horse, smoothing its blanket and feeling heat radiate into your chilled hands. The mingled scents of smoke, damp fur, and straw create a distinct olfactory map of survival. Reinforcing the reality of life in a harsh winter, the wind picks up in the early afternoon, carrying fine ice particles that sting exposed skin. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding the most effective marching formations under such conditions, yet visual and auditory cues, subtle gestures, and markers helped maintain cohesion. You notice companions exchanging quiet nods, adjusting positions, and carefully observing animals, creating a synchronized rhythm that balances safety and movement. Each minor adjustment is a negotiation with the environment, a constant calculation of risk and endurance. By mid-afternoon, fatigue is apparent, limbs ache, movement slow, and even animals display signs of strain. Documentation shows that periodic pauses, tending to wagons and gear, and careful animal care significantly improve survival. You rest momentarily, observing companions performing similar acts, adjusting furs, sharing morsels of food, stoking small fires. These repeated, subtle gestures form an invisible framework that sustains both morale and cohesion in a demanding landscape. As the day wanes, the column approaches a small rise, offering some protection from drifting snow and wind. Contemporary accounts indicate that even modest terrain features could dramatically reduce exposure, conserve energy, and provide psychological relief. You step carefully across icy patches, noting the faint flicker of fires along the ridge, casting shadows and providing guidance. In these quiet, deliberate moments, endurance is revealed as a balance of observation, ingenuity, teamwork, and meticulous attention to small details, demonstrating that survival in medieval winter campaigns was as much an art as it was a test of strength. The day begins with a pale, muted light, and snow continues to fall softly, covering tracks and flattening the landscape. Evidence demonstrates that scouting and reconnaissance were essential for avoiding hidden hazards during winter marches. You watch as scouts move carefully ahead, probing drifts and icy patches with long poles, marking safe paths for the column behind them. The crunch of snow underfoot and the distant snort of horses punctuate the otherwise quiet world, reminding you how attentive every step must be in a frozen environment. Accounts vary on whether armies relied more on formal scouting or improvised observation, yet it is clear that both were crucial for survival. Oddly enough, some soldiers tied small bells to horses or sleds, providing an auditory guide in low visibility. You hear the faint jingling as a scout moves ahead, and it gives a surprising sense of reassurance, a subtle signal that life continues despite the harsh environment. You adjust your cloak, noting how even minor measures like this maintain cohesion and safety across the column. Rations are taken sparingly during short breaks. Contemporary sources indicate that hardtack and salted meat were staples, while melted snow or weak ale provided warmth and hydration. Some historians propose that the ritual of eating together, even briefly, reinforced morale and gave soldiers a psychological boost. You nibble at softened bread, feeling its warmth spread through your chest, and take comfort in the rhythm of familiar tasks performed by your companions, each person moving with a quiet sense of purpose. Animals demand constant attention. Evidence suggests that horses and oxen were carefully checked for signs of fatigue or frostbite, with extra bedding and feed provided whenever possible. Remarkably, soldiers would smear fat or grease along hooves and lower legs to prevent ice accumulation, a practical adaptation that ensured continued mobility. You kneel to smooth a horse's blanket, feeling warmth radiate from its body, and appreciate how intertwined human and animal endurance is in these campaigns. The sense of damp fur, smoke, and straw form a vivid backdrop to the visual expanse of white. The wind grows stronger, sending sharp ice crystals across exposed skin. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding optimal column formations in low visibility, but subtle gestures, ropes, and small markers clearly helped maintain order. You notice companions signalling with gentle nods and adjusted positions, moving in a coordinated rhythm that balances safety with progress. Each movement is deliberate, each act a negotiation with the environment, a constant exercise in attention and care. By afternoon, fatigue is evident. Limbs ache, muscles tighten, and even the animals appear slower and more deliberate. Documentation shows that brief, regular pauses and careful tending of wagons and animals greatly increased the likelihood of safely reaching the next encampment. You pause, observing companions performing similar acts, adjusting furs, offering morsels of food, tending fires. These repeated gestures create cohesion and a subtle network of support, sustaining the column as it advances through the unyielding winter landscape. As evening approaches, the column moves toward a slight ridge, providing partial shelter from wind and drifting snow. Contemporary accounts indicate that even minor terrain features could preserve warmth, conserve energy, and offer psychological relief. You step cautiously across frozen patches, noting the flickering fires that mark the ridge and illuminate snow-laden tents and wagons. In these quiet moments, survival emerges as a combination of careful observation, improvisation, teamwork, and attention to the smallest details, demonstrating that enduring winter campaigns relied as much on ingenuity and vigilance as on physical strength. Snow falls in soft, unbroken sheets as the column progresses, each step sinking slightly into the powdery surface. Documentation reveals that firewood was a constant concern for winter campaigns, and soldiers often scavenged nearby forests or abandoned structures to maintain warmth. You notice companions gathering small branches and twigs, the faint crackle of flames rising from scattered fires mingling with the scent of damp wood and wet leather. Every movement, every decision about fuel, carries a weight that could influence both comfort and survival. Accounts vary on whether pre-planned firewood caches were common, or if armies relied largely on improvisation. Yet the consistent need for warmth dictated many of the day's priorities. Oddly enough, records describe soldiers mixing straw with animal dung to create an effective, if pungent, source of fuel when wood was scarce. You kneel briefly to stir a small fire, feeling heat radiate into chilled hands, and notice how even minor adjustments, adding twigs, shifting embers, offer a sense of control against the relentless cold. Rations are distributed in careful portions during short halts. Contemporary sources indicate that hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruit were the staples, often supplemented with melted snow to create hot drinks or soups. Some historians suggest that the act of preparing and consuming these meals provided structure and psychological relief as much as physical sustenance. You nibble at softened bread, appreciating warmth that slowly spreads through your chest and hands, while observing companions performing similar routines, reinforcing the rhythm of survival. Animals demand constant attention. Evidence demonstrates that horses and oxen were provided extra bedding and were checked frequently for signs of frostbite or fatigue. Remarkably, soldiers would sometimes rub fat along hooves or legs to prevent ice from forming, a simple yet effective adaptation that ensured continued mobility. You kneel beside a horse, smoothing its blanket, and feel heat radiate from its body into your chilled fingers. The mingling scents of damp fur, smoke, and straw create a sensory tapestry that defines life in winter marches. The wind carries fine ice particles across the landscape, stinging exposed skin. interpretations remain inconclusive regarding the most effective column formations in blizzards, though subtle gestures, visual cues, and rope lines were clearly critical for maintaining cohesion. You watch companions signalling quietly and adjusting positions, maintaining a coordinated rhythm that balances safety with forward progress. Every step, every subtle movement is a negotiation with the environment, requiring both vigilance and experience. By mid-afternoon, fatigue is evident throughout the column, limbs ache, movements slow, and even the animals show signs of exhaustion. Contemporary sources indicate that regular pauses, tending to wagons, and careful attention to animals greatly increase the odds of safely reaching the next encampment. You rest briefly, observing companions performing similar tasks, adjusting furs, sharing small pieces of food, tending fires, and realize that these small, repeated gestures are the invisible framework holding the column together. As evening approaches, the army seeks a ridge or cluster of trees to shield against wind and drifting snow. Documentation reveals that even minor terrain advantages could conserve warmth, reduce fatigue, and boost morale. You step cautiously across icy patches, noting the flicker of fires along the ridge that cast long shadows across tents and wagons. In these quiet moments, survival depends on observation, improvisation, teamwork, and the small, thoughtful actions that sustain life in an unforgiving winter environment. The snow continues to fall gently, settling on cloaks, horses, and wagons, creating a uniform white blanket that masks the terrain's hidden dangers. Records show that soldiers often relied on melted snow for drinking water, a necessity that carried its own risks if not properly prepared. You scoop a handful into your mouth, feeling the cold trickle down your throat, and sense the fleeting warmth of recently tended fires lingering nearby. The crunch of boots, the soft snort of horses, and the occasional creak of wagons punctuate the quiet, forming a delicate rhythm that guides the column forward. Accounts vary on whether melting snow was always safe to consume or if soldiers sometimes fell ill due to impurities, yet its availability made it an indispensable resource. Oddly enough, some soldiers boiled leather scraps in water during emergencies to create a crude broth, a desperate but practical adaptation that provided minimal calories. You watch companions gather snow, carefully melting it over small fires, and realize that these minor routines are vital to sustaining both body and morale in a landscape that offers little else. Rations are distributed sparingly, emphasizing energy conservation and endurance. Contemporary sources indicate that hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruit formed the staple diet, often softened with hot water or ale. Some historians propose that the ritual of eating in brief, deliberate pauses offered psychological comfort, reinforcing a sense of structure amid the relentless white expanse. You nibble at softened hardtack, savouring its warmth and the faint reassurance it provides, while observing companions performing similar rituals with quiet focus. The animals continue to require careful tending. Evidence demonstrates that horses and oxen received extra straw or bedding, and their legs were frequently inspected for frostbite. Remarkably, soldiers sometimes rubbed fat or grease along hooves to prevent ice build-up. A small but crucial practice for ensuring mobility. You kneel beside a horse, smoothing its blanket, feeling warmth radiate into your hands. The mingling scents of damp fur, smoke, and straw combine into a sensory backdrop that emphasizes both the harshness of winter and the persistent presence of life within it. The wind carries tiny ice crystals that sting exposed skin and make visibility difficult. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding which column formations minimized risk in snow-laden conditions, though subtle signals, ropes, and careful spacing clearly played a role in preventing separation. You watch companions adjusting their positions, nodding quietly, and coordinating movement with gestures and small sounds. Maintaining cohesion even as the world outside feels vast and indifferent. By mid-afternoon, fatigue is apparent in both men and animals. Limbs ache, muscles stiffen, and the animal's gait slows slightly. Documentation indicates that periodic rest, tending wagons, and consistent care for animals significantly improved the likelihood of continuing safely. You pause, observing companions performing small acts of maintenance, adjusting furs, sharing bites of food, stoking fires, and offering brief words of reassurance. Each gesture, though subtle, strengthens the cohesion of the group and ensures that survival is a collective effort. As evening approaches, the column searches for minor elevations or tree clusters to shield against drifting snow and wind. Contemporary sources indicate that even modest terrain advantages could provide warmth, conserve energy, and offer psychological relief. You step carefully across icy patches, noting small fires flickering along the ridge that illuminate tents and wagons in these quiet, deliberate moments. Survival is revealed as a complex combination of careful observation, improvisation, teamwork, and attention to detail, allowing the army to endure the relentless winter conditions with resilience and skill. The morning begins under a pale grey sky, snow drifting softly across the frozen ground, obscuring tracks and softening the landscape. Evidence demonstrates that soldiers often relied on small rituals and distractions to sustain morale during grueling winter marches. You notice companions huddled together, sharing whispered stories or quietly singing familiar tunes, a subtle defiance against the cold and monotony. The crunch of boots in snow, the low snort of horses, and the occasional groan of wagons create a delicate rhythm, blending human effort with the muted sounds of a frozen world. Accounts differ on whether these psychological measures genuinely improve survival rates, yet they appear consistently in contemporary chronicles. Oddly enough, some soldiers engaged in miniature games or challenges during brief pauses, testing dexterity or endurance, providing small bursts of levity that contrasted sharply with the relentless environment. You watch as one companion carefully tosses a small pebble across a snow patch, a brief diversion that draws a quiet smile, reminding you that even in extreme conditions, humans seek connection and small joys. Rations are consumed deliberately during short breaks. Documentation shows that hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruits were the standard fare, supplemented by melted snow for hot drinks. Some historians propose that the act of preparing and consuming food served dual purposes, providing nutrition and reinforcing routines that bolstered morale. You nibble at softened bread, feeling warmth travel into your chest, appreciating the ritual's subtle comfort as it punctuates the otherwise monotonous march. The animals remain under careful observation. Evidence indicates that horses and oxen were routinely inspected, their bedding refreshed, and hooves treated to prevent ice accumulation. Remarkably, soldiers sometimes applied fat or grease to protect hooves, a simple innovation that ensured mobility across treacherous surfaces. You kneel beside a horse, adjusting its blanket, feeling warmth radiate into your frozen hands. The sense of damp fur, straw, and smoke combine with the crisp winter air to form a distinct sensory landscape, grounding you amidst the white expanse. The wind shifts in gusts, sending tiny ice crystals across exposed skin. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding the most effective formations for minimizing risk, but careful spacing, subtle gestures, and small markers clearly helped maintain cohesion. You observe companions exchanging quiet nods and adjusting positions, each movement precise and deliberate. Every act, no matter how small, is a negotiation with both environment and circumstance, a testament to vigilance and attention. By midday, fatigue settles into limbs and muscles. Documentation reveals that frequent pauses, tending to wagons and animals, and attending to clothing were crucial for maintaining endurance. You rest briefly, watching companions perform similar acts, adjusting furs, sharing small morsels, stoking fires, and offering brief words of reassurance. These repeated gestures, subtle yet essential, sustain both morale and cohesion, forming the invisible framework of survival for the column. As afternoon wanes, the column moves toward a ridge offering shelter from wind and drifting snow. Contemporary sources indicate that even minor terrain advantages preserved warmth, conserved energy, and provided psychological comfort. You step cautiously across icy patches, noting small fires flickering along the ridge that illuminate tents and wagons. In these quiet, deliberate moments, survival emerges as a combination of observation, improvisation, teamwork, and attention to the smallest details, revealing the nuanced art of enduring winter's relentless grip. The morning unfolds quietly, snow drifting lazily over tents and wagons, softening edges and muffling sound. Evidence demonstrates that careful attention to clothing and layered insulation was essential for survival, as even brief exposure could quickly sap strength. You adjust your furs and woolen layers, feeling stiffness in your shoulders and fingers from the previous day's march, the crunch of boots underfoot, the soft snort of horses, and the occasional creak of a wagon form a subtle rhythm, punctuating the stillness of the winter landscape. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding whether prearranged routines or spontaneous adaptations were more effective for enduring long winter campaigns. You watch companions test icy patches ahead, adjusting their pace and positions in response to hidden hazards. A curious practice involves some soldiers slipping small strips of cloth or straw inside their gloves and boots to trap heat, a modest yet effective adaptation to the relentless cold. You do the same, noticing how even minor adjustments can significantly improve comfort and stamina during prolonged exposure. Rations are consumed with quiet attention during brief halts. Records reveal that hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruit formed the staple diet, often supplemented with melted snow for hot drinks. Some historians propose that the psychological benefit of these small rituals was as significant as their nutritional value, reinforcing routine and morale in a harsh, unchanging environment. You nibble at softened bread, savouring warmth travelling through your chest, and observe companions performing similar rituals, each gesture a subtle reinforcement of resilience. Animals are carefully tended throughout the march. Contemporary sources indicate that horses and oxen were provided extra bedding and periodically checked for frostbite or exhaustion. Remarkably, soldiers would sometimes apply fat or grease to hooves to prevent ice accumulation, an adaptation that proved essential for maintaining mobility. You kneel beside a horse, smoothing its blanket and feeling gentle warmth radiate through its body. The mingled scents of smoke, damp fur, and straw create a vivid sensory backdrop to life in a frozen, ever-changing environment. The wind carries fine ice crystals, stinging exposed skin and making even routine tasks more challenging. Accounts vary on whether tighter formations or more dispersed arrangements minimized injury and separation in such conditions. Yet subtle visual signals and quiet gestures appear to have been critical. You watch companions signaling through nods or adjustments, coordinating movement with care and attention. Every step and small action is part of a constant negotiation with both terrain and environment, emphasizing vigilance and adaptability. By mid-afternoon, fatigue is evident across the column. Limbs ache, muscles tighten, and animals show signs of weariness. Documentation shows that periodic pauses for tending wagons, feeding, and attending to clothing significantly increase the likelihood of safely reaching the next campsite. You rest briefly, observing companions performing similar acts, adjusting furs, sharing food, tending fires, and exchanging quiet words of encouragement. These repeated, subtle efforts create the invisible structure that sustains both morale and cohesion during arduous marches. As evening approaches, the column moves toward a ridge that offers shelter from wind and drifting snow. Evidence demonstrates that even minor terrain advantages conserve warmth, reduce fatigue, and provide psychological relief. You step carefully across frozen patches, noticing flickering fires illuminating tents and wagons along the ridge. In these quiet, deliberate moments, survival emerges as a combination of observation, improvisation, teamwork, and attention to small details, revealing the intricate balance necessary to endure the harshness of medieval winter campaigns. The day begins under a pale, grey sky, the air crisp with the sharp scent of snow and damp wool. Evidence demonstrates that careful inspection of clothing and armour was essential for maintaining warmth and preventing frostbite. You adjust layers of wool and fur, feeling the chill seep even through thick fabrics, and notice companions performing similar checks, brushing snow from boots and smoothing damp cloaks. The subtle rhythm of boots crunching on frozen ground, the distant snorts of horses, and the occasional creak of wagons form a soundscape that punctuates the silence of the winter landscape. Accounts vary on whether meticulous daily inspections were standardized across armies or improvised by individual units. Oddly enough, some soldiers were recorded warming stones in embers to tuck inside boots or gloves, a minor but effective strategy to stave off frostbite. You take a moment to adjust your own gloves, feeling a faint surge of warmth and renewed comfort as the column begins to move once more across the frozen terrain. Rations are distributed carefully during brief pauses. Contemporary sources indicate the hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruit form the core of the diet, often softened in melted snow or weak ale to provide warmth and sustenance. Some historians propose that the ritual of consuming these meals, even in small quantities, reinforced morale and offered a sense of routine in an otherwise unrelenting environment. You nibble at softened bread, appreciating its warmth and the subtle reassurance it provides, while watching companions perform similar rituals with quiet focus. The animals remain a constant concern. Records reveal that horses and oxen were provided extra bedding, and their legs and hooves were frequently inspected to prevent frostbite or ice accumulation. Remarkably, soldiers would sometimes rub fat or grease along hooves to maintain mobility across slippery terrain, a practical adaptation that significantly reduced accidents. You kneel beside a horse, smoothing its blanket and feeling the subtle warmth radiate into your hands, the combined scents of smoke, damp fur, and straw create an immersive environment, one that blends hardship with persistence. The wind picks up, carrying fine ice crystals that sting exposed skin and obscure distant terrain. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding optimal marching formations in blizzard-like conditions, though evidence suggests that visual cues, rope guides, and subtle gestures were essential for maintaining cohesion. You notice companions exchanging quiet signals, adjusting positions, and coordinating movement carefully, each subtle action contributing to the column's safety and continuity. By mid-afternoon, fatigue becomes evident. Limbs ache, muscles tighten, and animals show signs of exhaustion. Documentation shows that regular pauses, tending wagons, and attention to animals greatly increase the chance of reaching the next encampment safely. You rest briefly, observing companions performing small, repeated acts adjusting clothing, sharing morsels of food, tending fires, and offering quiet encouragement. These minor, persistent actions form the invisible framework that sustains morale, energy, and cohesion through the relentless winter. As evening draws near, the column reaches a ridge offering partial shelter from wind and drifting snow. Contemporary sources indicate that even minor terrain advantages preserved warmth, conserved energy, and provided a sense of psychological relief. You step carefully across icy patches, noticing small fires flickering along the ridge, casting shadows on snow-covered tents and wagons. In these quiet, deliberate moments, survival emerges as a complex interplay of observation, improvisation, teamwork, and attention to detail, demonstrating the delicate art of enduring winter campaigns in medieval Europe. The morning arrives with a faint silver light, reflecting off the fresh snow that blankets the tents, wagons, and horses. Evidence demonstrates that vigilance at the start of the day was crucial, as minor missteps in inspecting clothing or equipment could lead to frostbite or injuries later. You adjust your cloak and furs, feeling the stiffness in your shoulders and fingers, and notice companions brushing snow from boots and shaking out damp layers. The faint crunch of boots, the low snort of horses, and the occasional groan of wagons create a subtle rhythm, anchoring you to the reality of movement in a frozen world. Accounts vary on whether structured morning routines or improvisational checks were more effective, yet both approaches appear in contemporary chronicles. Oddly enough, some soldiers carried small heated stones tucked into gloves or boots to preserve warmth during the first hours of the day. You follow the practice, noticing how the minor boost of heat strengthens your fingers and instills a sense of comfort before the march continues across the icy terrain. Rations are consumed with care during brief pauses. Records reveal that hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruit were the staple diet, often softened with melted snow or weak ale to provide warmth and nourishment. Some historians propose that these rituals reinforced morale and offered a sense of normalcy amid the monotony of relentless snow. You nibble at a piece of softened bread, savouring the warmth and brief reassurance it provides. While watching companions repeat the same actions, each gesture reinforcing the shared rhythm of survival. Animals require constant attention. Evidence indicates that horses and oxen were checked frequently for fatigue and frostbite, provided with extra straw bedding, and fed small supplemental rations to maintain energy. Remarkably, soldiers would sometimes smear fat or grease along hoovers to prevent ice buildup, a practical adaptation that ensured continued mobility. You kneel beside a horse, smoothing its blanket, and feel warmth radiate into your hands, a subtle reminder of the close bond between human and animal endurance in these harsh conditions. The wind carries tiny, stinging ice crystals, making visibility difficult and every movement deliberate. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding the best column formations in such conditions, though subtle gestures, rope lines, and visual markers appear essential for preventing stragglers. You watch companions signalling quietly, adjusting positions, and coordinating movements, each small action part of a constant negotiation with the environment, balancing caution with forward progress. By mid-afternoon, the effects of prolonged exertion become clear. Limbs ache, muscles tighten, and even the animals move with a measured, deliberate gait. Documentation shows that brief pauses, careful tending of wagons, and attention to animals significantly increased the chances of reaching the next encampment safely. You rest momentarily, observing companions adjusting clothing, sharing morsels, tending fires, and offering quiet words of reassurance. These repeated, subtle actions create cohesion and maintain morale, reinforcing the collective effort required for survival. As evening approaches, the column seeks a ridge or cluster of trees offering partial shelter from the wind and drifting snow. Contemporary sources indicate that minor terrain advantages could conserve warmth, reduce fatigue, and provide psychological comfort. You step carefully across icy patches, noting the small fires flickering along the ridge that illuminate tents and wagons. In these quiet, deliberate moments, Endurance emerges as a blend of careful observation, improvisation, teamwork, and attention to detail, illustrating the nuanced art of surviving winter campaigns in medieval Europe. The morning light is muted and silvery, reflecting softly off the snow-laden landscape. Evidence suggests that careful monitoring of clothing and equipment at the start of the day was crucial for preventing frostbite and maintaining stamina. You tug your cloak tighter, feeling the stiffness in your shoulders and fingers, and notice companions brushing snow from boots, shaking out damp layers, and adjusting straps. The faint crunch of boots, the soft snort of horses, and the occasional creak of wagons create a subtle rhythm, reminding you that each step is both deliberate and necessary. Accounts differ on whether structured routines or adaptive improvisation were more effective in harsh winter conditions. Yet both approaches appear in contemporary chronicles. Oddly enough, soldiers sometimes placed heated stones inside gloves or boots to ward off numbness, a minor but effective adaptation that allowed them to maintain dexterity and warmth. You follow the practice, feeling the faint heat seep through layers, and notice the quiet relief it brings to your fingers. Rations are taken at intermittent pauses. Documentation shows that hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruit form the staples of the diet, often softened with melted snow or weak ale. Some historians propose that these small meals provided not only physical sustenance but also a psychological boost, reinforcing routine and a sense of stability in a monotonous, snow-covered world. You nibble at softened bread, feeling warmth travel through your chest, while observing companions performing the same rituals with quiet focus. Animals require constant attention. Contemporary sources indicate that horses and oxen were provided extra bedding, inspected for frostbite, and fed small rations to maintain energy. Remarkably, soldiers would sometimes smear fat or grease on hooves to prevent ice accumulation, a practical innovation that ensured continued mobility over slippery surfaces. You kneel beside a horse, smoothing its blanket, feeling warmth radiate into your hands, and appreciate the mutual dependence between human and animal endurance in winter conditions. The wind intensifies, carrying ice particles that sting exposed skin and reduce visibility. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding the most effective marching formations in snowstorms, though subtle gestures, rope guides, and visual markers were essential for keeping the column together. You watch companions coordinating quietly, adjusting positions, and maintaining rhythm with careful precision. Each subtle movement is a negotiation with the environment, a careful balance of caution and progress. By mid-afternoon, fatigue weighs on both men and animals. Limbs ache, muscles tighten, and the pace slows. Records reveal that brief, regular pauses for tending wagons, clothing, and animals significantly increase the chances of safely reaching the next encampment. You rest for a moment, watching companions perform small, repeated tasks adjusting furs, sharing morsels of food, stoking fires, and offering quiet words of reassurance. These subtle acts form the framework that sustains both morale and cohesion during the grueling march. As evening approaches, the column reaches a ridge that offers shelter from wind and drifting snow. Contemporary sources indicate that even minor terrain advantages could conserve warmth, reduce fatigue, and provide psychological relief. You step cautiously across icy patches, noticing flickering fires along the ridge illuminating tents and wagons in these quiet moments. Endurance emerges as a balance of observation, improvisation, teamwork, and attention to detail, demonstrating the nuanced strategies required to survive winter campaigns in medieval Europe. The morning begins under a pale, hazy light, and snow falls gently, covering tents, wagons, and footprints with a soft white layer, Records reveal that early inspection of clothing, armour, and gear was essential for maintaining warmth and preventing frostbite during long winter marches. You adjust your furs and cloak, noticing stiffness in your fingers and shoulders from days of trudging through snow, the subtle crunch of boots, occasional snort of horses, and groaning of wagons create a rhythm that guides the column forward. A quiet soundtrack to persistence and endurance. Accounts differ on whether strict routines or adaptive improvisation best supported soldiers' survival. Yet both approaches appear in contemporary sources, oddly enough. Some units carried small pouches of heated stones to tuck inside gloves or boots, a minor yet effective method for preserving dexterity and warmth. You follow this practice, feeling faint heat travel through your layers, a small but significant comfort against the relentless cold. Rations are consumed sparingly during short breaks. Contemporary sources indicate that hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruit were the standard fare, often softened with melted snow or weak ale to provide warmth and hydration. Some historians propose that the ritual of preparing and eating these meals offered a psychological reprieve, creating a sense of normalcy and stability in a harsh and monotonous environment. You nibble at softened bread, feeling warmth seep through your chest and limbs, while observing companions performing the same actions, quietly reinforcing cohesion. Animals demand constant care. Evidence demonstrates that horses and oxen were given extra bedding, small supplemental rations, and frequent inspections for signs of frostbite or fatigue. Remarkably, soldiers would smear fat or grease along hooves and lower legs to prevent ice buildup, a practical adaptation that ensured continued mobility. You kneel beside a horse, smoothing its blanket and feeling warmth radiate into your hands. The mingling scents of damp fur, smoke, and straw form a vivid sensory backdrop that underscores the persistence of life in the frozen world. The wind picks up, carrying sharp ice crystals that sting exposed skin. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding the optimal column formations during heavy snow, though subtle signals, ropes, and careful spacing appear essential for maintaining cohesion. You watch companions signaling quietly, adjusting positions, and coordinating movement. Each act a delicate negotiation with the environment and terrain. Every step, every adjustment is purposeful, reinforcing survival through vigilance and skill. By mid-afternoon, fatigue is visible, limbs ache, muscles stiffen, and even the animals move with slower, deliberate steps. Records show that periodic pauses, tending to gear, and attention to animals greatly increase the likelihood of safely reaching the next campsite. You rest briefly, observing companions performing similar acts, adjusting furs, sharing morsels, tending fires, and offering quiet words of encouragement. These repeated gestures form an invisible framework sustaining morale and cohesion, crucial in the unforgiving winter landscape. As evening approaches, the column approaches a ridge that offers shelter from wind and drifting snow. Contemporary sources indicate that even minor terrain advantages could preserve warmth, reduce fatigue, and provide psychological relief. You step cautiously across icy patches, noticing the flicker of small fires along the ridge that illuminate tents and wagons. In these quiet, deliberate moments, endurance emerges as a combination of observation, improvisation, teamwork, and careful attention to detail, exemplifying the subtle art of surviving winter campaigns in medieval Europe. The morning breaks under a grey, diffused light, the snow falling in soft sheets that mute sound and obscure the landscape. Evidence demonstrates that careful inspection of clothing, armour, and equipment at the start of the day was essential to prevent frostbite and maintain energy. You adjust your layers of wool and fur, feeling stiffness in your fingers and shoulders, and notice companions brushing off snow, checking straps, and ensuring that boots and gloves are secure. The soft crunch of boots, the distant snort of horses, and the occasional creak of wagons create a subtle rhythm that guides the column. A quiet soundtrack of persistence in the frozen world. Accounts vary on whether structured morning routines or adaptive improvisation provided the greatest advantage in survival. Yet both appear repeatedly in contemporary chronicles. Oddly enough, some soldiers carried small heated stones tucked into gloves or boots to stave off numbness. A minor but effective innovation. You follow the practice, feeling the faint warmth spread through your layers, offering both comfort and a sense of readiness as the march begins. Rations are taken during brief pauses. Records show that hardtack, salted meat, and dried fruit were the staples, often softened in melted snow or weak ale to provide hydration and temporary warmth. Some historians propose that the act of preparing and consuming food offered psychological benefits, reinforcing routine and morale in an otherwise monotonous and punishing environment. You nibble at softened bread, feeling the warmth travel slowly through your chest, and observe companions performing similar rituals, each gesture reinforcing cohesion. Animals continue to demand careful attention. Evidence demonstrates that horses and oxen received extra bedding, supplemental feed, and frequent inspections for frostbite and fatigue. Remarkably, soldiers sometimes smeared fat or grease on hooves and lower legs to prevent ice buildup. A simple yet effective adaptation that ensured mobility. You kneel beside a horse, smoothing its blanket, feeling warmth radiate into your hands. The mingling scents of damp fur, smoke, and straw create a sensory tapestry that underscores life persevering in a harsh environment. The wind carries fine ice particles, stinging exposed skin. Interpretations remain inconclusive regarding optimal column formations in blizzard-like conditions. Those subtle visual signals, rope lines, and careful spacing were essential for maintaining cohesion. You watch companions exchange quiet gestures, adjusting positions and coordinating movement, each subtle act and negotiation with terrain, snow and cold. Every step and adjustment contributes to the delicate balance of endurance. By afternoon, fatigue is pronounced, limbs ache, muscles tighten, and animals move with careful, deliberate steps. Documentation shows that regular pauses, tending wagons, and attention to clothing and animals significantly increase the chance of safely reaching the next camp. You rest briefly, observing companions performing similar tasks, adjusting furs, sharing morsels, stoking fires, and offering quiet encouragement. These small, repeated actions form the unseen framework sustaining the column's morale and cohesion. As evening falls, the column reaches a ridge that provides shelter from the wind and drifting snow. Contemporary sources indicate that even modest terrain advantages could conserve warmth, reduce fatigue, and offer psychological comfort. You step carefully across icy patches, noticing small fires flickering along the ridge, illuminating tents, wagons, and the snow around them. In these quiet, deliberate moments, survival emerges as a balance of observation, improvisation, teamwork, and meticulous attention to detail, revealing the nuanced art of enduring winter campaigns in medieval Europe. The snow falls softly now, a gentle curtain over tents, wagons, and horses. You feel the tension of the day's march gradually release from your shoulders, the chill settling into a quiet rhythm rather than a sharp sting. Fires flicker faintly across the ridge, casting gentle, warming light that dances over snow-covered ground and fur-covered animals. You take a slow breath, the crisp air filling your lungs, carrying faint scents of smoke, damp wool and straw, even the wind, persistent and icy, feels softer as night deepens and the world becomes hushed. Companions huddle close, sharing small comforts, a bite of bread, a whispered word, a brief adjustment of cloaks or blankets. You notice how the animals, too, are calm. The soft rhythm of their breathing and shifting weight forming a quiet harmony with the gentle crackle of embers. The relentless demands of movement, vigilance, and improvisation fade for a moment, replaced by the simple presence of warmth, light, and shared survival. You feel the subtle reassurance of preparation, ingenuity, and careful attention to the smallest details, all of which have carried you through another day of winter's unforgiving grasp. You settle near the fire, letting the heat soak into your fingers and face, noticing how shadows stretch and mingle across the snow. Every breath, every quiet sound is part of the world around you, grounding you in the present. The vast whiteness beyond the ridge, once daunting and oppressive, now feels distant and almost gentle, softened by night and by the quiet rhythm of life continuing within the camp. The column rests, animals breathe steadily, and fires flicker in time with subtle movements of companions. You feel a deep sense of endurance and calm, knowing that each small effort, the care for animals, the tending of fires, the attentive steps across frozen ground has mattered. The cold remains, but it is softened by routine, vigilance, and human ingenuity. Slowly, you close your eyes, letting the rhythm of snow, wind, and shared warmth lull you into rest. The world feels steady, safe, and gentle. Sweet dreams